This man took the blacksmith qualification exam, yet smashed the weapon he had just finished in public. All the examiners thought he had gone mad, and he said only one sentence: "Trash like this is not worthy of bearing the name of a blacksmith." They could not understand it. How could a mere candidate be so arrogant? But they did not know that in his previous life, this man had already been the strongest master blacksmith. Relying on his own skill, he fought all the way to the final victory. But even though he won, humanity still did not survive. Because the 6 demon gods who destroyed the world were terrifyingly strong. Among them was the last one as well, the demon god of the Sea of Destruction. That demon god was dead, but most of the surface had long since been swallowed by the Sea of Death he created. Thinking of this, the man could not help letting out a cold laugh. He had struggled to stay alive until the very end, only to still die in the sea. Forget the surviving heroes, even the tower of heroes that supported the earth had already collapsed. This damn sea of ruins still had not dispersed, even after the demon god's death. At that moment, someone behind him replied sarcastically, "Listening to you, someone who doesn't know better might think all the credit belongs to you alone." And this man was called Mad Dog. The woman known as Burst Dog also coldly added, "A coward who pretended to be sick and lay there the whole time sure talks tough." This team was clearly full of resentment toward the man. The man called Ice Dog was also grumbling inwardly without stop. "I said it a long time ago. He just wanted to ride the Legion's coattails." Faced with their mockery, the man did not even raise his eyelids. "Without the equipment I made, you'd all be dead already, and you still dare to run your mouths." And he was known as the last blacksmith, Lee Se-hoon. After hearing that, the few of them trembled with anger. "You little brat, your mouth is really vicious." The 3 standing in front of him were the so-called 3 dogs. Their strength was absurdly great, but their personalities were just as absurdly strange. They stood neither with humanity nor with the demon realm. They were completely neutral. They acted however they pleased, recognized only profit, and were opportunists in the gray zone. They were selfish bastards, that was true, but they survived until the very end and still played a crucial role in the war. It had to be admitted that without them, it would have been impossible to win this war. But if they had acted earlier, would the ending have been different? Mad Dog suddenly dropped to his knees, his voice trembling. "I'm done for, all my organs have been crushed." Burst Dog and Ice Dog were the same. Their hearts had been pierced, and they were beyond saving. Lee Se-hoon snorted coldly. "If you had stepped in earlier, you wouldn't have died at all. These 3 damn dogs only know how to save their own skins and turn a blind eye to everything." But the instant he turned around, his eyes froze completely. Burst Dog and Mad Dog in the front had already stopped breathing. Ice Dog in the back was motionless as well, lying on the ground. Lee Se-hoon let out a sigh in his heart. The cost of this victory was too heavy. He gripped his hammer tightly and slowly stood up. He found a suitable spot and began hammering down blow by blow. He spent a full 2 hours repairing all their weapons and placing them back beside them. After their deaths, Lee Se-hoon used their weapons to make them a gravestone. Next, it would be his turn. The towering tsunami before his eyes would soon swallow him. Lee Se-hoon slowly raised his palm. This was the last time he would ever do this. In the next second, he suddenly pressed his palm against his own chest. His fingers curled slightly, forcibly extracting the bond that belonged to him from within his body. This was one of his abilities, called bond extraction. At this moment, a clear crystal stone appeared in his palm. This was a blacksmith's unique skill, to extract special or from a target with whom a bond had been established. The effect depended on the depth of the bond and the target's potential. But every time I use it on myself, what I get is even worse than ordinary ore. If only I had awakened earlier. If this extraction still gives me nothing at all, then I'll accept it. The sound of metal striking echoed continuously through the air. Every 10 strikes, the waves surged once. Lee Se-hoon's voice seemed to blend together with the billows of the Sea of Destruction. But he could still clearly distinguish the sound of his own forging. Because every time it rang out, he could create something beyond imagination. Just then, a burst of golden light suddenly exploded. As the hammer came down, his final forged item finally took shape. Lee Se-hoon looked at the sharp sword. Satisfied as he was, it had excellent quality, and its effects were strong. But in the end, it had no special ability at all. He had thought he could forge something truly meaningful, even if it were only a bond stone that belonged to himself. But this sword was far too ordinary. Lee Se-hoon suddenly thrust the sword into his own heart. Rather than be swept away by the waves, he would end it with his own hand. He had not expected that his final act would actually be blacksmithing. Thinking about it, he really was crazy enough. His body was swept into the sea by the giant waves. As he let go of that final sword, he finally realized something. Ever since he first awakened to magic, he had always heard the sound of waves. He had never understood what it was, but now he finally did. It was the sound of the Sea of Destruction. If I had understood earlier, maybe I should have tried to persuade those 3 dogs sooner. If I had been just a little earlier, and fought for others just once, maybe many things would have been different. And at that very moment, system windows began popping up frantically. Armament image has manifested. And all of this came from the last sword he forged. Image skill. Return to origin has been activated. Before Lee Se-hoon could understand what an image was, the figure of a man appeared before him. Lee Se-hoon, what the hell are you doing? After coming to his senses, Lee Se-hoon jolted awake. Why am I at the entrance exam site? If this is 31 years ago, could this be Babel's entrance exam? Or is this my dying hallucination? But he quickly denied it. Everything just now was definitely not an illusion. Which meant there was only one possibility left now. The sword he forged at the end really did have a special skill. Could it be that my weapon activated return to origin? And at that very moment, the teacher gave an impatient warning. If you don't start taking this seriously, I'm throwing you out. Lee Se-hoon had already confirmed it. Through that sword skill, he had returned to the past. As long as he awakened earlier and tempered himself earlier, he would have a chance to rewrite the ending. In the next instant, Lee Se-hoon suddenly grabbed the hammer on the table. Nothing else mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered now was seizing this opportunity placed right in his hands. The corners of Lee Se-hoon's mouth lifted slightly. This time, I will protect everything. Everything of mine will begin with this entrance exam. In this life, I will pass Babel's test, meet the three dogs again, and make them save humanity. With one hammer strike, a different kind of sound rang out in the air. The moment that sound fell, the instructor's expression froze completely. He turned back in shock. That candidate seemed a little off. Every time the hammer fell, that sound appeared again. The sight sent a chill down people's spines, yet it was impossible to forget. The movements looked slow, but every strike was steady, precise, and ruthless, the sound crisp and clean without the slightest bit of noise. In the instructor's eyes, Lee Se-hoon's fundamentals were terrifyingly solid. For a long stretch afterward, the instructor went nowhere and simply stood not far away, staring at him fixedly. When Lee Se-hoon picked up that half-finished product, everyone was stunned. What level of completion was this exactly? The expressions on their faces were left with nothing but disbelief. Another instructor also sucked in a breath of cold air. A monster had appeared this year. If he submitted this half-finished product right now, he could even pass directly. But no one expected it. Lee Se-hoon swung his hammer and smashed the half-finished product to pieces. That scene left all the instructors dumbfounded. Lee Se-hoon let out a low laugh. I still have a long road ahead of me. I will never let trash like this appear in the world under the name of blacksmithing. To put it bluntly, I look down on that half-finished product from just now. The instructor behind him roared in fury. What do you think this exam is? But Lee Se-hoon's next sentence made all the instructors freeze. I request a redo. One instructor was just about to refuse when another voice interrupted him. Give him all the remaining materials. I want to see what kind of finished product he actually intends to make. After getting the materials, Lee Se-hoon began heating the ore again. With his current body, forging a top-tier weapon was unrealistic. His magic power was insufficient. His strength was insufficient, and time was insufficient as well. So under these circumstances, he had only one choice. No one could understand what he was trying to do. All they saw was him pouring magic power into the ignition stone. This method was extremely dangerous, and with even the slightest mistake, it could blow up the entire exam hall. After injecting the magic power, he threw all the materials into the furnace in one go. In an instant, blinding 7-colored flames burst out from the furnace. Those who did not know what was happening thought the furnace was about to explode, and some even got ready to rush for fire extinguishers. Even the assistant thought so, but the instructor raised a hand to stop him. If a candidate dared to do this, then he definitely knew what he was doing. The instructor told the assistant to carefully observe the flow of the flames. What Lee Se-hoon was using was the 5-colored flame demon and 5-colored fire demon, a high-temperature flame obtained through 5 resonance ignition stones. This indeed required extremely precise magic control, but the technique was very powerful, allowing high temperatures to be achieved with very little magic. Everyone present was surprised. It had not exploded. And they also discovered that the color of the furnace was changing. The instructor understood. He was using resonance gems to add firepower while simultaneously altering the attributes of the ingot. The teacher could also tell that Lee Se-hoon was doing this to compress the forging time. But even so, the remaining 300 minutes were still terribly tight. What Lee Se-hoon had shown earlier was indeed astonishing talent. But if this was all he could do, then this was as far as he would go. He kept hammering that piece of stone, with the pressure of time making it hard for him to breathe. He had to go faster. Finally, after an hour and a half, he forged the smelted stone into a thin sheet. Lee Se-hoon's heart sank. Good. From here on it would be much simpler. He picked up the thin sheet with tongs, returned it to the furnace, and smelted it again. When the heat was right, he took it out once more. Next, he had to repeat these actions over and over. And every strike was shaping it little by little. Just then, he noticed that the web between his thumb and index finger had suddenly split open. He sighed inwardly. His magic power was exhausted, and the protective barrier had disappeared. The first thing after the exam would be to begin simulation training. But there was no way he could stop now. He tightened his grip even more. Lee Se-hoon continued dropping the hammer like mad. At this point, he could not afford to waste even a second. He pushed his body to its limit. Now only the final minutes remained, and though things were tight for Lee Se-hoon, there was still enough time. His hand speed reached the maximum as he quickly ground out the blade's edge. At the end, he carefully adjusted the straightness of the blade body again, and by then, there was almost no time left. At the moment the countdown ended, Lee Se-hoon finally let out a long breath. The blood on his hands had long since dried, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that he had made this blade perfectly, and he had also obtained the flame craftsman skill. This blade was called the five-colored flame blade. Its grade was high grade, a curved blade engraved with 5 flame patterns. The flames condensed in the blade react with magic power and bloom into multiple colors. This is a weapon that fully displays the forger's potential. Depending on the nature of the magic infused into it, the blade's color and properties will undergo subtle changes. Everyone present was stunned by the high-grade evaluation. The assistant from before came running over at a trot. He could hardly wait to announce that Lee Se-hoon had passed the test. But the moment he opened his mouth, the instructor beside him clamped a hand over it. "Shut up, you're too noisy." 10 minutes later, Lee Se-hoon walked into the instructor's office. After a round of conversation, the teacher realized that Lee Se-hoon was actually still dissatisfied with the finished product from earlier. In the end, the instructor made a decision. He would not let him join this academy and asked him to withdraw his application, because this place could not meet the standard Lee Se-hoon needed. Babel's reputation was beyond reproach, but the forging department had not produced any real achievements to this day. Lee Se-hoon did not interrupt, because he had known it long ago. The Babel forging department would be shut down a few years later due to poor performance, and the true top forging academy of the future would be Vulcan Academy. So the instructor hoped Lee Se-hoon would go to Vulcan Academy for further study. But the moment he finished speaking, Lee Se-hoon interrupted him. "Professor, you are wrong. The best Blacksmith Academy will not be Vulcan, but Babel Academy, which I am about to join." The professor looked at him in disbelief. That had once been his dream as well, and now a young man had spoken it aloud himself. "If you really want to do that, then your first step is to become one of the Academy's top figures. Do you think you can do it?" Lee Se-hoon answered very calmly. It would not be much of a problem. At least among the students, no one would be stronger than him. The professor asked him another question. "Do you know how Babel chooses its top freshmen?" Lee Se-hoon of course knew. As far as he knew, each department first chose the top 2 to participate in an extra test, then selected one departmental head candidate, and finally the ultimate head was decided from among the candidates. Babel Academy divided its students into multiple training departments. Among them, the combat department was the main one. At the same time, there were also support departments, and each department branched into multiple subdivisions like tree roots. To sit at the top, one had to possess supernatural ability and also be publicly recognized by the Academy as top talent to qualify. After hearing Lee Se-hoon explain it, the professor's arm trembled slightly. He said seriously, "What I'm about to say is an old blacksmith's advice to you, not a professor's order. Even if you stand out in the academy, it will still be very hard for you to truly succeed here as a blacksmith. Go to Vulcan Academy." The professor was speaking from experience. He knew clearly that place was the most suitable one for Lee Se-hoon, and also the safest path. His words made Lee Se-hoon smile faintly. For now, this professor seemed like a decent person. He cared about the future of the younger generation and did not care about saving his own face. Lee Se-hoon told him, the environment could not affect him. Just as he had said earlier, he would definitely do it. The place he would enroll in was Babel, and he would also make this place become the very best academy. The professor understood. What Lee Se-hoon meant was, wherever he was, that place would become stronger. This kind of confidence was almost a declaration of war. The professor slowly extended his hand and shook his in return. This was not only confidence, it was even naked arrogance, but for some reason, he did not dislike it. Then, with a smile, he extended his hand. "From here on, please take care of me." At the moment the two shook hands, Lee Se-hoon's skill activated. He established a bond between himself and the other party. Lee Se-hoon responded with a smile, "Professor, please take care of me as well." System notification. Lee Se-hoon has established a bond with Kim In-cheol. Lee Se-hoon's bond ability is now level 1. Night came quickly. After Lee Se-hoon returned home, he immediately activated bond extraction. Very soon, a piece of metal appeared out of thin air in his palm. After checking it, Lee Se-hoon confirmed. It counted as a rare material, with a core mixed with flame attributes. System notification. Extinguishing smelt iron. Its grade is rare quality. It belongs to high-grade metal, can carry flame characteristics, and like wood, possesses fire-removing properties. Compared with the materials he used in his previous life, it was of course inferior, but for now, it was already quite good. It was just that this material was too small. Sure enough, rare items could not appear casually. The skill bond extraction could quantify his relationship with a specific target, then extract a completely new kind of or that had never been seen before. The problem was that his level was too low, so he could not use it smoothly, which meant he had to level up as soon as possible. And compared with the other students, Lee Se-hoon's attributes were absurdly low. Lee Se-hoon indeed still had many shortcomings, but being able to return to the past meant he had no right to complain. He absolutely could not rush now. Rushing would only ruin things. He had to formulate a training plan. Once his strength improved, he would have enough time to crush those bastards in the Demon Legion. What the Demon Legion threatened was not only humanity, but the survival of the entire planet. Those 6 demon gods were pushing humanity toward extinction, even dragging the whole planet down with them. To stop them, Lee Se-hoon could not afford to be picky about methods. Facing the key turning points of the future, he absolutely could not let his memories become blurred, so he had to prioritize obtaining weapons or skills related to memory. The first step of Lee Se-hoon's plan had already been completed. He had successfully entered the academy. Next, he had to find the 3 dogs. But just then, a notification sound interrupted his thoughts. The moment he saw the message, his pupils suddenly contracted. The system showed Lee Se-hoon's level had already reached level 1. Bond engraving has been added. Soon, time advanced to Babel Academy 1 week later. Lee Se-hoon had been running around the academy for several days. After all, this was a place from 30 years ago, so it was normal for him to get lost. But he was sure this time should be right. Very soon, he found Smith's room, which was today's test location. There were 2 tables in the room, and beside him was another examinee taking the test at the same time, while ahead was the examiner's scoring desk. Keeping rhythm with a beat, the examiner spoke. "You look pretty relaxed, huh? Not nervous at all?" After saying that, he shot an unhappy glance at the professor beside him. "Don't you see everyone else is waiting?" And the person speaking was the vice dean. The professor sighed and could not be bothered to argue with him. "Vice dean, the additional test starts in 5 minutes. The 2 teachers went back and forth, arguing endlessly. Lee Se-hoon found it a little speechless to watch. Apparently it was not just the forging department's situation that was bad. Their relationship with upper management was strained too. He finally understood why the professor had recommended another academy to him yesterday. These waters ran too deep, and the examinee beside him looked fierce too, his eyes seeming to overflow with killing intent. With just one glance exchanged, Lee Se-hoon was sure, this guy was the type who refused to lose no matter what. Out of politeness, Lee Se-hoon still spoke up. "I'm very glad to meet you." Just as he had expected, the other party not only ignored him, but looked at him as if he were trash. Lee Se-hoon felt even more speechless. He had not even done anything to the guy. Soon, a cool and distant female voice rang out in the room. The moment the voice appeared, everyone immediately turned toward it. She had just sat down when the vice dean slowly spoke. "I was wondering when you would finally arrive, department head." But when Lee Se-hoon saw her face clearly, his whole body froze on the spot. He knew that face far too well. He never expected to meet her again in this way. It's really been a long time. The woman had red hair, with sharp yet beautiful features. She was the dean of Bolsipa Academy, Ri-woon-ha. Lee Se-hoon's mind went blank for an instant. How was this glutton here? She was already a world-recognized S-rank hero, and she also possessed the unique ability to strengthen herself by devouring weapons. Before Lee Se-hoon was reborn, she had even been an old client who had worked with him for many years. But Ri-woon-ha had not managed to survive until the final war. Before she died, she said one thing to Lee Se-hoon. She regretted eating the weapon he had forged. At that moment, Lee Se-hoon felt as if his heart had been torn open. Humanity already had so few strong fighters, and now there was one less. Ri-woon-ha's combat power back then had been terrifyingly absurd, and she had blocked far too many attacks from the demon gods for the front lines. Just then, Lee Se-hoon's thoughts were forcibly interrupted. The examiner at the front tapped the desk, telling him to focus. Now the rules would be explained. This exam would last 90 minutes. Within those 90 minutes, the equipment you make must be used together with the sword theme from the previous exam. As he spoke, the examiner slowly raised his fist. In the next second, flames suddenly ignited in his palm. In this exam, you may only use alchemical forging to create your equipment. The teacher glanced again at the materials on the floor. There was a large amount of ore prepared in the room. All materials could be freely combined, and the candidates could choose for themselves. One more thing, your finished products will be judged jointly by Department Head Ri-woon-ha and Vice Dean Balmuth. So before you begin, make something you can be proud of. With a wave of the examiner's hand, the test officially began. The young man beside Lee Se-hoon stared at him with disdain. But Lee Se-hoon could not even be bothered to look back. This extra test would choose only one person. Then Lee Se-hoon tied on his apron and began selecting the ore needed for alchemical forging. While he was choosing materials, the yellow-haired young man kept staring at him. Only by resonating pure magic power with the materials can elemental magic stay under control. Do you think staring at the materials will make your magic power rise on its own? Lee Se-hoon shot him an annoyed glance. What materials he chose was none of his business. What right did he have to point fingers? The young man's tone grew even more arrogant. Someone like you has no right to be in this room. At that moment, the professor quickly walked over to Hans Barmit. He warned Hans Barmit not to say things unrelated to the exam, or else he would affect his opponent. Only after the professor's reminder did Hans Barmit restrain himself a little, but when Lee Se-hoon heard that name, he froze on the spot. No wonder he thought the vice dean and this guy looked alike. They were father and son. The more he thought about it, the more ridiculous it felt. The anger on Lee Se-hoon's face was caught clearly by the young man. Instead, he became even more smug, as if showing off. You've already figured out whose son I am. In his eyes, on one side was a commoner freshman with low status and low magic power. On the other side was the heir of the Balmuth family, a prestigious alchemical forging family, with magic power intensity that could even rival top second years. At that moment, Hans Barmit began selecting his own materials. In his view, competing with someone like this was a waste of time. The result had already been decided, and the winner would only be him. Ryu Eun-ha, seated in the center, let out a cold snort. Lapis lazuli and aquamarine jade are both high magic capacity materials. Before she could finish, the vice dean picked up the words. That's right, and they're also attribute materials infused with water element magic. The professor's heart sank as he listened. Water element materials were extremely sensitive to fire, making refinement exceptionally difficult. Did he really have that much confidence? The vice dean sneered dismissively. That's an old way of thinking. Alchemical forging has changed a long time ago. The professor thought about it and had to admit that was true. Alchemical forging was not restricted by place or setting, but because the caster and the ore differed, the time required could vary enormously. So under today's conditions it really was not ideal. The vice dean could not be bothered to keep arguing with the professor. In any case, he would understand soon enough. His son could synthesize any ore within minutes. In the next moment, Hans Barmit finally began synthesizing the ore. A transparent magic sphere rose up, locking the two ores firmly in the air. Hans's resonant synthesis required only minutes. That level was already beyond what a freshman should be capable of, and could even be compared with second years. Hearing this, the professor finally understood. He could refine magic stones in a short time. The material setup and exam rules had all been designed in advance. From the very beginning, this test had been biased toward Hans. The professor shot the vice dean a fierce glare and cursed inwardly, "Old fox." Meanwhile, on the other side, Ryu Eun-ha kept staring at Lee Se-hoon. There was a trace of shock in her eyes. The two ores Lee Se-hoon had chosen were red and white, hydromonide and fire red stone. The other two examiners also locked their gaze onto him. These two ores were precisely the fire attribute counterparts to lapis lazuli and aquamarine jade, and they likewise had high magic capacity. But the vice dean knew nothing about Lee Se-hoon's true ability, and only found his pride irritating. If anyone had the right to be proud, it should have been his son. Lee Se-hoon's movements also drew Hans Barmit's attention. In Hans's eyes, Lee Se-hoon was deliberately choosing same-tier materials to compare himself against him. He even cursed Lee Se-hoon inwardly for being stupid. With that tiny amount of magic power, he could never control fire red stone. Seeing this, Hans Barmit felt even more secure. This guy was not just stupid, but laughably conceited. Beating him would be even easier than expected. But in the very next second, his pupils suddenly widened. At that moment, Lee Se-hoon activated the bond engraving skill. Bond engraving link of fire began to activate. He could use them while wearing bonds. The currently available slots were the left arm and right arm. Gradually, flames extended outward from Lee Se-hoon's fist. He was equipping Link of Fire, Ironstone on his right arm. In the next moment, a tiny flame sprang up on his arm. And then the fire surged violently, directly wrapping around half his arm. When that rich kid saw the scene, his expression turned even uglier, and he could only force himself to think, it was just for show, meaningless. Lee Se-hoon lightly twisted his palm, and the power of the flames moved exactly as he wished. With a spread of his 5 fingers, all the selected high-grade ores floated up, undergoing flame tempering in midair. Everything progressed exactly according to his calculations, without the slightest deviation. At this rate, it would not be long before he could complete the weapon. The examiner saw all of this clearly. The dean's gaze turned cold. He was going to forcibly resonate same attribute ores? That was simply idiotic beyond belief. Attribute ores were only supposed to resonate with pure magic power. If he forced it the way Lee Se-hoon was doing, elemental magic would sooner or later spiral completely out of control. He sneered inwardly, nearly unable to suppress the corner of his mouth. That idiot was about to cause a huge disaster. But what he never expected was that not only did Lee Se-hoon not lose control, he instead pushed that power even harder and fiercer. A terrifying aura suddenly erupted from the ore and swept through the entire room in an instant. At that moment, both the professor and Ryu Eun-ha narrowed their eyes from the sting, almost unable to keep them open. But the dean stared fixedly at Lee Se-hoon, his eyes filled with nothing but disbelief. In front of Lee Se-hoon, 4 or 5 streams of flame rose up. Beneath the flames, a crystal-clear long sword scabbard slowly took shape. Lee Se-hoon let out a breath. Done. For him, this level of low-grade forging had never been difficult. It was only exhausting because his magic power was too lacking. He raised his hand and grabbed the scabbard from midair into his palm, and at the same time the system notification sounded. Congratulations, you have completed the forging of the flame-layered sword scabbard. Grade, super rare. At that instant, both the professor and Ryu Eunha were completely stunned. Even the dean, who had looked down on Lee Se-hoon earlier, was left with nothing but shock in his eyes. Even he might not be able to make something of this level. Because this scabbard was not only super rare, but also came with a flame layering effect. Hans Barmid beside them even stopped what he was doing. He had not expected Lee Se-hoon to finish the synthesis so quickly, and at a speed even faster than his own. He could not understand it. Wasn't elemental magic supposed to lose control? Could it be that all this time, he had been the one on the wrong path? And at that very moment, a problem appeared in his own synthesis. Hans Barmid's breathing instantly became chaotic. Ahead of him, the vice dean shouted frantically, "Stop. If you inject elemental magic into the magic stone, it will explode." Very soon, the magic sphere in front of Hans began trembling violently. In the next second, a burst of gas sprayed straight into his face. The magic sphere began shattering at an astonishing speed. With a bang, Hans Barmid's forging completely lost control. In the blink of an eye, a quarter of an hour passed, and all the materials in Hans Barmid's magic stone were shattered. His face was full of unwillingness. This long-awaited test had been destroyed by his own hands. Ordinarily, after the judging ended, the best candidate would be chosen from the two of them. But what made the professor troubled was that the other person had not even submitted a finished product, and after being shaken by his opponent's performance, had failed outright. The professor's eyes also carried regret. Hans Barmid lowered his head, forcing back his tears. He had prepared for so long, and it had all become wasted paper. At this moment, blood was flowing from his arm, yet he could only watch helplessly as he lost without even truly fighting. But at this moment, the dean suddenly came up with a despicable idea. He straightened his clothes and put on a concerned look. Since a student had been injured during the exam, it would be best to cancel this exam and reschedule it for another day. The professor objected on the spot. "We cannot cancel an exam that has already started." In the end, all of this was caused by Hans's own negligence, wasn't it? The dean shamelessly replied, "So it seems Professor Kim thinks the result is more important than the student, is that it?" Professor Kim's status was lower than the dean's, and in the end he could not be bothered to argue further. The dean continued, "At present, the fastest resonance time published in academia is 5 minutes. Yet this person completed material synthesis in 6 minutes. He clung to one point. Lee Se-hoon was only a freshman who had just enrolled, so it was impossible for him to complete resonance the instant he activated his magic power. No one would believe it if it were said aloud. Alchemical forging was, by nature, a technique of forcibly creating weapons with magic when ordinary forging could not accomplish it. What it pursued was not the traditional method of exhausting the ore and pouring the blacksmith's life into it, but tracing back to the core origin of the ore and awakening the ore's own vitality. This was the true essence of alchemical forging. That was exactly what Lee Se-hoon had just done, and it was also the answer that the forging world would eventually reach after countless trials and errors. The method itself was not complicated, and within a few years it would become the standard, so it was not really some great secret. Faced with an old bastard who had wanted to suppress him from the very beginning, Lee Se-hoon had no interest in explaining. He only replied coldly, "I have no idea what you're talking about." Hearing that, the dean burst out laughing. "It seems you really did use disgraceful means. A freshman with no background making a rare weapon? Even cheating should have its limits." That sentence completely ignited Lee Se-hoon. "What the hell are you supposed to be?" Just then, Ryu Eunha suddenly stood up. "He's right, this is too ridiculous." Hearing support, the dean immediately became even more arrogant. "You understand too, don't you, department head? This is too absurd. Cancel Lee Se-hoon's qualification for cheating and hold the exam again." But Ryu Eunha did not even look at him and walked straight past him. She walked up to the scabbard Lee Se-hoon had forged and gently brushed her hand over it. The instant she touched the scabbard, she felt an extraordinary and unusual sensation. Ryu Eunha found it unbelievable. This phenomenon had never been reported before, which meant Lee Se-hoon was the only one who had achieved it. Even more absurdly, a little saliva actually appeared at the corner of her mouth. Ryu Eunha raised a hand and pointed at Lee Se-hoon. "Student Lee Se-hoon, may I ask you a question?" She wanted to take a bite of the scabbard Lee Se-hoon had just forged. If that was too much, then could she at least lick it once? The dean froze on the spot. What exactly was this supposed to mean? Even Professor Kim at the side was dumbfounded. Ryu Eunha had this kind of habit? For a moment, only awkward silence flowed through the room. By the time Lee Se-hoon left the test site, the sky was already nearing evening. No conclusion was given on the spot for this test. He was only told to go home first and wait for notification. Fortunately, the process had gone smoothly. He had easily forged a super rare weapon. Just as Lee Se-hoon had expected, the overall completion was not bad. but the fine adjustments in the details were still rather rough. But remembering the dean trembling with rage, Lee Se-hoon did feel satisfied. He had sensed the man's malice toward him the moment he entered the exam hall. Now he had finally paid him back a little. Just then, Lee Se-hoon suddenly felt that the surname Barmit sounded strangely familiar. Trying to remember, he raised a hand and kept scratching his head. Soon he remembered, in his previous life, Burst Dog had once mentioned that name. Back at Babel, that bastard had forced Burst Dog to do the hardest labor, pressed down the price of her weapons to practically nothing, and then those weapons had suddenly exploded. Burst Dog suffered backlash from magic power, and that was how she became what she was later. If not for that bastard, she would not have had to accept partial modification. At the time, Lee Se-hoon had also felt sorry for Burst Dog. Thinking of this, Lee Se-hoon slowly came to a stop. The blacksmith who left Burst Dog with lifelong after effects, that name was Barmit. In other words, Hans Barmit was that person? Truly sinister and vile. In this life, Lee Se-hoon's first priority was to make contact with the three dogs as early as possible and pull them back onto the right track. That way, at least one of them would no longer be a concern. As long as he could keep an eye on Hans Barmit and stop him from acting recklessly, Burst Dog would not spiral out of control. Next, all he had to do was go back and wait for the notice. Meanwhile, in the conference room of Bolsipa Academy, everyone present looked grim, because the dean had made a decision to elevate Lee Se-hoon into one of Bolsipa Academy's top figures. Seeing their expressions, Ryu Eun-ha understood as well. This decision was indeed forceful, but in this academy, she was the sky. Once she spoke, it was iron law. Even if someone wanted to object, they could not change her decision. The professors feared Ryu Eun-ha and did not dare confront her head-on, so they could only circle around their opposition in the form of suggestions. After all, Ryu Eun-ha had only recently taken over as department head, so doing this was indeed not very graceful. Of course, Ryu Eun-ha understood perfectly. The vice dean had been coveting her position all along. The moment the vice dean spoke, someone immediately echoed him. We admit his weapon is astonishing, but perhaps it should be examined more carefully. Professor Kim explained from the side. That's because you still haven't seen student Lee Se-hoon's flame-layered scabbard with your own eyes. The craftsmanship may still have flaws, but the way he controls magic power, and his coordination with the five-colored flame blade, it is nearly perfect. Another professor refuted. I admit it's remarkable, but I don't believe he can truly reach that level. Ryu Eun-ha directly cut everyone off. This time, his level of completion may only be 60% of his target, perhaps even lower. And precisely because it is not enough, it excites me. Then, Ryu Eun-ha threw out a second decision. If, after watching student Lee Se-hoon's academy top seat demonstration, you still cannot accept my decision, then I will resign from the position of dean. As soon as those words fell, the entire room went silent. No one had expected Ryu Eun-ha to stake her own position on it. 54 years ago, in order to drive human evolution forward, the Heavenly Realm sent down the Tower of Heroes. In response, the Abyss released the Swamp of the Demon Legion, capable of corrupting all life. As opportunity descended, disaster came with it as well. And Babel was born amid that tide, the greatest academy in history, rising from the center of the Pacific Ocean. Countless heroes emerged from here, including the enthroned Emperor Ludwig Schubert, and everyone seated here might one day become one of them. Standing on the stage, the old man said to all the freshmen, keep moving forward. That is the duty of you heroes who climb Babel. Lee Se-hoon sneered inwardly. Your duty is not to climb the tower, but to fight the Demon Legion in the future. Still, the emperor before him, Ludwig, really was a good person. He was not this gentle in reality, but his heart was not bad. At that moment, the host took the microphone. Next, we will enjoy this year's top freshman demonstration. As soon as the words fell, the outstanding students from each department stepped onto the stage one after another. As Lee Se-hoon watched, he thought, in his previous life, those people loved showing off, and now in this life, it was his turn to stand on the stage. At this moment, there were 3 people in the venue. The 3 of them were responsible for this assembly's demonstration. When Lee Se-hoon saw the machine being pushed up, he completely understood. The academy loved showing off too. The host made a grand gesture. The prop to be used for today's demonstration was the latest development. The prop he spoke of was a robot. It was an automaton model produced by the Puppet Factory, called Graham, powerful enough to fight a rank-level hero to a standstill. This was a combat-type automaton with no special armament, focused on close combat. The host's tone was clearly excited. The first to appear is a combat department genius. Next, please enjoy the battle demonstration of Jack Myers, the top student of Alkakoff Academy. The moment Jack Myers stepped on stage, the entire hall instantly fell silent. Lee Se-hoon remembered him, the 3rd young master of the Myers family, born into a swordsmanship house, yet somehow he had become a pure battle maniac. Very soon, Myers took his stance. Today, he intended to make this demonstration clean and beautiful. At that moment, the robot's eyes lit up red. The host lowered his hand, signaling for Jack Myers to begin. In the next second, the robot moved. Its speed was absurdly fast, and in the blink of an eye it was already right in front of Myers. The robot threw a punch, and even the air carried the sound of something tearing through it. But no matter how it attacked, Myers could evade with ease. Myers' speed was equally astonishing. The robot's final strike missed, and Myers' figure disappeared directly from where he stood. When he appeared again, he had already retreated more than 10 meters away. He had probably figured out the robot's attack speed and strength. Next, it was his turn to counterattack. In the next second, his figure shot forward explosively. He roared as his right fist gathered power. "I've trained this punch for 15 years. Can you take it?" The punch landed. It smashed heavily into the robot. The entire audience was stunned. This punch was far too exaggerated in power. With that single punch, the robot's armor was directly blasted apart. Lee Se-hoon was shaken inwardly. What was going on? He clearly remembered that Myers had died young in his 20s, and in the end had only been an A-rank hero. But with a performance like this, talent like Myers's was something even Babel only saw once in 10 years. But Lee Se-hoon could not understand. Why had he hit a hard wall at a certain rank in his previous life? Myers grinned. "That's all?" The second punch landed and directly smashed the entire robot apart. The robot's head crashed heavily onto the ground. Only then did Myers let out a breath. "It's been a long time since I've fought this satisfyingly." The host stood there with his mouth open for a long time. This performance was too outrageous. He had nearly crushed a robot with combat power comparable to a C-rank hero in an instant. Myers waved at the audience. "Just basic stuff. Mainly because the C-rank robot is too weak." His very first move had already pushed the stage atmosphere to suffocation. The people who went on next would only face even greater pressure. At that moment, a figure slowly passed before Lee Se-hoon's eyes. The moment Lee Se-hoon saw her, he knew. Pressure? It did not exist. She was a UR-tier top student. Inoue Eric, the eldest daughter of the Inoue family, one of Japan's 3 great houses. She was not a full clearer, yet with a single myth-grade weapon, she rose to fame as an S-rank hero. Even though she ultimately fell into becoming a demon retainer, Lee Se-hoon knew her future would be corroded, and getting too close was not wise, but he still wanted to pull her into his camp. But just then, Eric suddenly turned her head and glared at Lee Se-hoon. Lee Se-hoon was stunned. Why was she looking at me? Right now, she and I should have no connection at all. After thinking for a long time and getting nowhere, he gave up. Better to watch how she fought first. For this demonstration, the robot had been fitted with basic armor, making its defense about twice that of the standard model. The host called out loudly, "What kind of performance will student Inoue deliver? Everyone, wait and see." A moment later, Inoue slowly lifted the cage in her hand. Inside it was a blue-eyed crow. Strangely, the crow's gaze was exactly the same as Eric's. She lightly uttered a single word, "Go." The crow in the cage instantly flew toward the robot. But as it approached the robot, the crow's figure suddenly shot higher, charging straight into the air. Lee Se-hoon could not understand it. With only a single crow, how was she supposed to fight? The crow kept rising higher and higher. The robot, however, did not move at all. Its target setting was specific targeting. It could only attack the crow and could not attack Eric. It slowly raised its arm and entered a defensive stance. Once the robot switched into defense mode, breaking through would become extremely difficult. It had been designed for defense in the first place. Eric let out a soft breath. In the next second, a streak of blue light burst from the crow's eyes. The crow moved, spreading its wings like a general issuing an order. It dove down violently. Its speed was so fast it left after images. After every hit, the crow immediately rose again, then dived again, then struck again, an unbroken chain. It was as if Eric had done nothing, yet also as if she had done far too much. She simply stood there without moving a single step. A few seconds passed, and Lee Se-hoon felt his heart tighten as he watched. A hole had been forcibly drilled through the robot's chest, right in the most fatal position. Its strongest defense looked like paper in front of this crow. With a thud, the robot dropped heavily to its knees. Only then did Eric call the crow back, and it shifted from machine form back into ordinary form. The entire venue erupted. Using just one combo sequence, she had directly pierced through the reinforced armor automaton. Lee Se-hoon felt sweat appear on his forehead. She could show off and then leave, but I can't. If I just put my weapon on display and step off the stage, the whole crowd will boo me on the spot. Next, I have to show the real thing. The last to appear was the top student of the Technical Academy, Bolsipa. When Lee Se-hoon walked onto the stage, Schubert above let out a soft sigh. This year's top freshmen were too strong. It had been a long time since the forging department had produced someone of this level. Hopefully all that pressure would not crash entirely onto Lee Se-hoon. Seated beside Schubert was Ryu Eun-ha. This time, she was serving as the demonstration supervisor. Ryu Eun-ha believed Lee Se-hoon would definitely be able to do it, but her heartbeat was still accelerating. Lee Se-hoon slowly drew his blade. Now, it was his turn. His earlier exam work, the long blade and scabbard, was now laid out before everyone. The audience immediately exploded. Rare grade? Since when could the forging department make something like this? A freshman already having a rare weapon? This was insane. The dean sneered. Heaven really was on his side. At this rate, the position of dean of Bolsipa Academy would sooner or later be his. He looked up at Ryu-un-ha. Just wait to pack your things and get out. Hand over the position obediently. On the demonstration stage, Lee Se-hoon asked the host to switch to model number 8. He wanted to add 2 more layers of armor, because only that way could he display his true level. The host was stunned on the spot. Do you know what you're saying? Model number 8 could even withstand attacks from a B-rank hero, and Lee Se-hoon wanted to add more armor on top of that. The host had no authority to decide such a thing and could only feel troubled. So he told Lee Se-hoon to use model number 10 first. You're making a last-minute request. We don't have time to prepare. But at that moment, Professor Kim's voice came from behind. He directly pushed over an already armored robot, 1 tier higher than the previous 2, able to withstand attacks from an A-rank hero, even more absurd than B-rank. The host completely stopped knowing how to salvage the situation. If this kept going, the scene would spiral out of control. Even Lee Se-hoon was a little surprised. Professor Kim would actually do this. He truly understood him. Professor Kim stood there with folded arms, looking at Lee Se-hoon. Go on, give them hell. From his eyes, Lee Se-hoon read the exact same meaning. The host also gave up caring, since the equipment was ready, then let them do as they pleased. His only job was to announce the start. After the demonstration began, Ryu-un-ha stared fixedly at Lee Se-hoon, wanting to see what level he could truly reach. Her psychological expectation was only one thing: the more earth-shaking, the better. Lee Se-hoon's gaze was sharp. He would not disappoint them. Then he slowly drew his blade and took the opening stance of an Iajetsu slash. The instant the blade left the scabbard, light from 5 colored flames burst from within the sheath. The robot on the opposite side also entered defensive mode. Meyer shouted from below the stage, "This is insane. I'm starting to look forward to it." But Hans, who had lost to Lee Se-hoon, wore a face full of disdain. It's just flashy fireworks. What's there to look forward to? In his eyes, Lee Se-hoon was only a brat with insufficient magic power. The flames of the 5-colored flame blade conflicted with one another. Once they erupted, unless the user had extremely strong control over magic power, it would be easy to injure himself in the blast. Combining it with the properties of the flame-stacking scabbard, he tore the flames apart and compressed them inside. Lee Se-hoon then used Flame Craftsman, injecting crimson fire into the inner side. This would suppress the conflict. Now, his build-up was complete. At the same time, the robot opposite him had long since finished preparing its defense, simply waiting for him to make his move. In the next moment, Lee Se-hoon directly unleashed the wildfire from within the scabbard, pushing all the magic power in his body to the limit. The weapon skill wildfire of the flame-layered scabbard instantly detonated the compressed magic power stored inside. When wildfire was triggered in this state, the forcibly compressed fragments of 5-colored flames would all explode at once. The professors in the audience were all stunned. What kind of power was this for a student to release? Even the host felt an ominous pressure. The commotion was too great. After slashing out that strike, Lee Se-hoon slowly walked forward. He flicked the blade in a flourish, then instantly sheathed it. The moment he saw the power, even Lee Se-hoon himself broke into a cold sweat. That went a little too far. The ground in front of him had been forcibly torn open into a long trench. That was the slash mark left behind by the sword energy. The host froze on the spot. This was already beyond anything unbelievable could explain. The principal immediately dispatched a construction support team to the central hall to repair the floor, and thus the midterm evaluation of the academy top student demonstration was completed. The sound of high heels echoed down the corridor, one step at a time. Lee Se-hoon sat on the sofa, waiting for Ryu-un-ha to come over. A moment later, Ryu-un-ha walked in. "Sorry to keep you waiting. I was helping clean up the arena just now." That sentence instead made Lee Se-hoon feel a little awkward. The one who should be apologizing was him. He was the one who had cut out that trench. He should have held back, but failed to. Ryu-un-ha froze for a moment. "What are you talking about? I'm not here to lecture you." Only then did Lee Se-hoon realize she was not here to settle accounts with him. Ryu-un-ha immediately explained, "You misunderstood. I called you here because of something else." Suddenly, her stomach growled. Of course, Lee Se-hoon knew her ability, but he could not expose it now. She had never made it public, and she was obviously eyeing his weapon. Ryu-un-ha gave a dry cough. "Anyway, I'm willing to pay 10 times the market price to buy your weapon." She wanted to buy Lee Se-hoon's 5-colored flame blade and butterfly fire scabbard. But Lee Se-hoon could only apologize. He would not sell those 2 weapons to anyone. Just then, a system prompt popped up. "You have established a connection with target Ryu-un-ha." Ryu-un-ha grabbed Lee Se-hoon's hand. The bond was formed, level 1. "That weapon set of yours is too astonishing. I hope you'll sell it to me. I really have use for it." Even Lee Se-hoon had not expected it. It would happen this quickly. In his previous life, this should only have appeared after she had devoured multiple weapons of his and her body had begun to regress toward degeneration. But no matter what, this was an opportunity. In the next moment, Lee Se-hoon directly activated bond extraction, and blue magic spread between their joined hands. A system prompt appeared. Lee Se-hoon has extracted a bond from target Ryu-eun-ha. System prompt. Obtained iron of greed, top grade quality. This is a metal that generates heat by devouring iron. It corrodes all iron it comes into contact with, melts alloys, and absorbs them into itself. A black-red spike sphere appeared in Lee Se-hoon's palm. He finally understood something. When Ryu-eun-ha heard him say that, her eyes lit up. Then name your price, and I'll buy it. But Lee Se-hoon directly refused. What I mean by understand isn't that. At that moment, a man's voice came from outside the door. The newcomer was Professor Kim. He said the principal's award ceremony was about to begin. He told Lee Se-hoon to go over immediately. A look of disappointment flashed across Ryu-eun-ha's face. Then go ahead first. Before leaving, Lee Se-hoon only left behind one sentence, see you later. After they left, Ryu-eun-ha's stomach began growling again. She had gone too long without eating top-grade weapons. At this moment, in the center of Babel Academy, in the Oro main building, Barduk Manor. Following Professor Kim, Lee Se-hoon slowly walked toward the office. Professor Kim reminded him that he had to mind his words and conduct in front of the principal. He forgave the damage you caused to the Paul during the demonstration. And he is not someone we can look at as an equal. Absolutely do not make him displeased. Lee Se-hoon told Professor Kim not to worry. When it came to dealing with people, he had a firm grasp on it. A moment later, Lee Se-hoon met the principal, who knowingly asked, "So you are student Lee Se-hoon?" This principal was an unquestionable hero of humanity. Before Lee Se-hoon returned, he had once perished together with the sixth demon god in a battle to the death. Besides that, he also had another identity, a full clearer. The principal slowly said, "Every weapon you demonstrated today was captivating. I cannot say they were without flaws, but I have already begun to look forward to your future performance." Lee Se-hoon keenly caught the words with flaws. He had already prepared himself mentally, yet still wanted to throw the five-colored flame blade and flame-layered scabbard back into the furnace and remake them. The Academy's upper ranks had acknowledged his talent and effort, and the principal would give him 2 rewards. Hearing there would be rewards, Lee Se-hoon's heartbeat nearly skipped. And since he was allowed to propose the contents himself, he directly asked for things that could enhance magic power and memory. The principal agreed readily. He raised his palm, then slowly lowered it, and the moment it came down, a golden gate unfolded in the air. Immediately afterward, a golden ruin appeared beyond the gate. From the ruin descended 2 treasures. One possessed the property of devouring everything except darkness itself. The other contained dreamlike magic power that crossed the boundary between reality and dreams. Lee Se-hoon was shaken inwardly. Inkevi darkness was already rare enough, but Dreamfong was even rarer. Both were absurdly precious treasures. He would not be able to fully control them immediately, but he could already foresee their uses. The principal smiled lightly. "Are you satisfied with this prize?" Lee Se-hoon replied, "Extremely satisfied, and perfectly flawless. Thank you, principal." Then he left, while the principal stood upstairs, watching his departing figure. That rune actually spoke. "I really don't know what you're thinking, giving that child 2 rewards, and both so rare." The principal exhaled a puff of smoke, because he has enough capacity to digest them. The rune pressed further. "Is that all? He really does seem like an old man inside a child's body." The principal finally opened one eye. That means, he is unfathomable. And the principal had realized one more thing. Even he could not fully gauge the upper limit of Lee Se-hoon's talent. Inside the teaching building an hour later, someone asked Hans Barmit to go have lunch together, but he said he already had plans with Senior Howard. That person was shocked. "The Senior Howard you mean, the top-ranked 3rd year at Bolsipa Academy?" Hans looked smug. "Our families go way back, so we meet from time to time. He said he'd give me some advice about academy life, so we agreed to chat." While they were talking, Lee Se-hoon slowly walked into the classroom. At that instant, Lee Se-hoon's gaze changed. He had to keep a close eye on Hans Barmit and make things clear first. Don't cause trouble. This concerns the 3 dogs. Meeting Lee Se-hoon's eyes, Hans Barmit felt a chill in his heart. He did not understand why Lee Se-hoon's hostility was so intense. Especially those eyes, as if they wanted to swallow him alive. Hans felt his back turn cold. He clearly had never provoked Lee Se-hoon, and aside from that exam, this was their first real meeting. But Lee Se-hoon kept staring at him like a ghost, as if silently warning him, "If you dare stir up trouble, I'll tear you apart." When Lee Se-hoon turned his head away, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly instead. "At least he still knows his limits. When he meets my eyes, he's afraid at the very least." Hans trembled with rage. He had actually been frightened by a single look. A moment later, Professor Kim also walked into the classroom, lowering his voice. "Quiet down. And today's class would be taught by him personally." For the first class, he decided to begin with self-introductions. Professor Kim gestured for someone to bring over a piece of projection alloy stone. He slowly raised the stone. This stone is dozens of times more sensitive to magic power than ordinary ore. If you inject magic power into it like this, the form of the weapon in your mind will quickly take shape. In the next second, a weapon condensed in Professor Kim's hand. It was exactly what he had just envisioned in his mind. Lee Se-hoon was inwardly shaken, as expected of a hero who had entered the world's top 100 craftsmen. And he could sense that this Professor Kim was not merely impressive. Lee Se-hoon could even feel an abnormal fluctuation of power from his contract stone. Professor Kim continued, precisely because it is so sensitive, it is almost impossible to use as an actual combat weapon. But it can reflect traits that even you yourself have not realized, allowing you to see who you are. That was why weapons forged from projection alloy were called avatars. In the forging department, you would use an avatar to introduce yourselves. Your works would be displayed in the main building for 1 week, so don't be perfunctory. Put your full strength into it. Everyone was astonished. A projection alloy of this level would easily be worth over 10 million won apiece. Truly, Babel lived up to its name. Even self-introductions had to be taken this far. But after many of them tried, they realized there was no real key talent here. They were simply too weak. Lee Se-hoon could not help sighing. This group was practically a pack of fools. Compared with the geniuses he had seen in his previous life, they did not even qualify as scrap. At that moment, Lee Se-hoon slowly rose to his feet. He was the last person to go on stage for the self-introduction. He picked up a stone, and his projection surfaced on its face. Since he had already climbed to a top position, there was no need to hide anymore. Since he had chosen this path, then he would do it to the best of his ability and make sure no one dared look down on him. So this time, he also decided to go all out. At the very least, he would suppress these freshmen first. In the next moment, a huge plume of smoke shot up above the teaching building. That was the aftershock of Lee Se-hoon's magic power directly overflowing when he used the projection alloy stone. The scene shifted, and the sword Lee Se-hoon made was placed in the exhibition hall. Everyone thought it was only an ordinary longsword. But the genius beauty of the academy took one look at it, and her eyes lit up instantly. As expected, the work of the forging department's top student was indeed different. Ordinary people simply could not see the precision of its internal structure. At the same time, Lee Se-hoon was still swinging the hammer without pause. He had to ensure that the point and force of every hammer strike were exact down to the slightest fraction. All the students present were dumbfounded. Up to now, he had not shown even a single second of deviation. The assistant behind him could not help thinking, what exactly could teachers like them still teach him? This kid was too outrageous. So the assistant simply skipped over Lee Se-hoon and decided not to teach him at all. An hour later, the students finally finished their assignments, and Lee Se-hoon began checking those assignments one by one. When he saw that row of swords, the fist in his hand tightened unconsciously again. They were too terrible. It seemed he would have to smash these swords to pieces again. In other people's eyes, those semi-finished products were already excellent enough, but Lee Se-hoon could not think highly of them at all. Just as he was about to swing his fist and smash all the swords, a voice came from behind him. You want to smash them a second time? That single sentence from the assistant made Lee Se-hoon pause. Could these not be smashed? The assistant was practically begging him, don't break them again. They have to be delivered after this week's forging class ends. Do you know where the student's budget comes from? Babel allocates funds based on your external weapon sales data. So what exactly are you dissatisfied with? Your body? Your magic power? Or the weapon you made? Lee Se-hoon laughed awkwardly. The most critical issue right now really was his body. He wanted to make training equipment and needed to refine ink like darkness, but his physical strength was too poor, and he could not even endure the attempt. The teaching assistant gave him an idea. If it's for forging, wouldn't a buff effect be faster than training? The moment those words fell, it was like a flash of light exploded in Lee Se-hoon's mind. He had actually never thought of that before. In his previous life, he had been too obsessed with avoiding such shortcuts and had only trapped himself instead. But for the current him, this method was exactly suitable. He had already turned back time, and his body was weak to an absurd degree. As long as the buff remained, he would have a chance to refine the ink like darkness. Lee Se-hoon called out to the teaching assistant, thanks for the guidance. The assistant felt it was nothing much. After all, there was not much he could teach Lee Se-hoon anyway, and this was only a small suggestion. Lee Se-hoon's gaze fell on the assistant's sword. This sword was not forged very finely, and was even a little rough, at least in his eyes. I noticed your smithing earlier. Your magic power consumption during forging is too high. Try reducing it to 30% of what it is now and focus all your power on a single point. That way, the assistant's forging level would improve significantly. For him, this was more effective than simply piling on more magic power. After saying that, Lee Se-hoon left, as a return favor, since the other party had also given him advice. The assistant's face was full of embarrassment. A freshman had actually turned around and instructed the teaching assistant just now. But he still took the words to heart, and his eyes slowly dropped to the hammer on the table. In the blink of an eye, it was afternoon. A Babel professor had already said before, the academy encourages every student to study independently. You may audit courses from other academies, and even take multiple electives in one semester. But everyone must complete their major courses, fail 3 times, and you will be expelled. You enjoy freedom, but you must also pay the price for your choices. And Lee Se-hoon's next stop was the university district. There was something there he needed. Soon the train arrived, and Lee Se-hoon got off. He never expected to run into Eric the moment he stepped off. The 2 senior students behind her directly barked at Lee Se-hoon to move aside and stop blocking her way. Lee Se-hoon frowned. Where had these people come from? Why were they speaking so aggressively? What if I don't move? What are you going to do? With that one sentence, the 2 behind her immediately flared up. But Eric asked Lee Se-hoon where he was going. Lee Se-hoon said he wanted to visit the UR Academy and look for some courses he could take as electives. Eric answered quickly, I'm from the UR Academy. I'll take you. But the senior student said there was a meeting afterward and that Eric had to be there. Hearing that, Eric's voice turned cold on the spot. She turned back to stare at the 2 of them, suppressing her anger. I'm not interested. Now get lost. The seniors froze on the spot. Her attitude toward Lee Se-hoon and toward them was like that of 2 different people. For Lee Se-hoon, though, that was a good thing. At least he now had someone to guide him. So they ignored the 2 senior students and headed back to the academy directly. On the way, Eric asked him what kind of elective he actually wanted to study. Lee Se-hoon said it plainly. He wanted a buff effect. Something that could strengthen the body, but could not interfere with forging. Eric recommended barrier arts, but that leaned more toward defense and did not seem quite right. Then she pulled an invitation out of her pocket. You may have misunderstood. The key isn't the art itself, but how you use it. Immediately afterward, she layered a barrier over the envelope and quietly chanted an incantation. Eric told Lee Se-hoon to try tearing open the envelope. Lee Se-hoon gave it a light shake and found that it seemed as if its hardness had been enhanced. But it was not simply harder. It still retained its original material qualities, only turning hard instantaneously when subjected to a strong impact. Eric looked somewhat pleased with herself. For something this complex, you may need a professor's help. That professor of barrier construction married into the phone family. If you need it, I can introduce you. As she spoke, Lee Se-hoon looked at the pattern on the envelope, and the more he looked, the more familiar it seemed. Soon he understood, it was only a smokescreen. In the next moment, Eric stared ahead in disbelief. The envelope she had just handed over was directly torn in half by Lee Se-hoon. She could not understand at all. How had Lee Se-hoon put together the Inoue family's barrier art in such a short time? Lee Se-hoon tossed aside the torn envelope and clapped his hands. Barrier art really is good. Thanks for the tip. I'm going to register for the course. As for you, go have lunch with those 2 who've been following you. After Lee Se-hoon left, the 2 hurried over anxiously. Miss, are you all right? Looking at the torn envelope on the ground, Eric was in a very bad mood. She had even taken out the invitation, yet Lee Se-hoon had casually torn it apart. What a strange person. At the ceremony the next day, many people from the arts department had their eyes on Lee Se-hoon. Lee Se-hoon had originally been quite ordinary and should not have stood out this much. But Eric in front of him had forcibly raised his visibility. Everyone wanted to know how he had ended up walking together with her, and some even said they had seen them appear together yesterday as well. Lee Se-hoon sighed inwardly. No matter where he went, there was no escaping gossip. If Eric really liked him, they should already have had some clearer connection. But speaking of it, is this class screening people? After I registered, they told me to come for a test first. Eric brought Lee Se-hoon to the test site for barrier construction. It was a forest. There were a few figures ahead of them, as if they were looking for something, but they could never find it. Lee Se-hoon guessed that the test was something like a treasure hunt. Just hearing it sounded troublesome, not as straightforward as the combat department. After making a round, he confirmed it was still just a visual deception. Along with a heavy stomp from Lee Se-hoon, the barrier before his eyes shattered instantly. A teacher said in shock, "You passed." Afterward, the barrier professor received notice. Miss is interested in that genius boy? The man before him said little, only handing Perry a photo from his phone. In the photo was Lee Se-hoon walking side by side with her on the street. Although they had tripled the number of applicants, Perry was not happy in the slightest. Since young Master Inoue has also made a request, this year we will add the test of the Dazzling Soul Maze. The so-called Dazzling Soul Maze was a barrier that twisted the senses and caused people to lose their sense of direction. At its core, it was still a barrier, but if you did not understand ritual arts, you would not even realize you had already fallen into it. So for an ordinary person to break through it was almost impossible. But Eric had not helped him at all, and Lee Se-hoon still forced his own way through the Dazzling Soul Maze. This left the barrier professor deeply shocked. At the time, he announced to those who passed, "You have now become members of this class. From now on, you will be sorted by your scores in the first test," and soon a red-haired student volunteered, "I'll go first." He was calculating in his heart. This time, he had to make his presence felt in front of Eric. Perry waved a hand casually. "The test is simple. You maintain the barrier in front of you, then break it using only magic power." A red magic circle rose at his feet. After the examiner announced the start, the person slammed a palm onto it. The scoring was based on time, so it had to be both fast and precise. This was a barrier with a spider at its core and a web-like structure. The spider would sense the flow of magic through the threads and keep escaping. As long as the spider remained, the web would regenerate endlessly. Very soon, the red-haired student could no longer hold on. His magic power was not enough to cover the entire ritual pattern. So he decided to use a rougher method, suppress the spider with explosive speed. In the next second, magic power burst from his palm once more, and he finally passed. But his time was 2 minutes 23 seconds. Next time, understand the structure before you act. After passing, he even looked back at Eric, but Eric did not so much as raise her eyelids. And everyone who went up after that failed. Several people in a row were unable to break the spider barrier. Those with poor scores would be assigned to the basic class. After they finished, the next to step forward was in no way Eric. She did not rush to make a move, but first inspected the structure of the spider barrier. Very quickly, she found the core of the spider web, and the core point was actually at the very edge of the web structure. In the next moment, the entire web collapsed directly. No one in the room could believe it. How exactly had she done that? She had both dismantled the ritual pattern and caused the barrier to collapse instantly. The spider inside the barrier had also been cut to pieces. This was top-level skill. In no way Eric truly deserved her future status as an S-rank hero. In no way Eric used 23 seconds, a good result, but by textbook standards, she could still have been 2 seconds faster. The teacher looked at Lee Se-hoon. Last one, Lee Se-hoon, stepped forward for the test. The teacher carefully sized up Lee Se-hoon's body. At first glance there was nothing special about him, so he had to confirm it personally. Lee Se-hoon did not immediately break the barrier, but lowered his head to observe the structure of the spider web. Everyone was confused. The test had already started, so what was he still looking at? Had he not reacted yet? Lee Se-hoon ignored them. He was judging that this barrier had a mechanism similar to ink-heavy darkness. If it did not reach the critical point, it would repair itself, so to refine ink-heavy darkness, he would have to apply exactly the right amount of stimulation in one go, with the ratio precise to the limit. The teacher could not understand what Lee Se-hoon was doing and stepped forward to take a closer look. But at that moment, Eric raised a hand to stop him. Please do not interfere with his test. The teacher could only stop where he was. At the same time, movement stirred in Lee Se-hoon's palm, and a cluster of flame power poured into the central line of the web, slowly extending downward along the pattern. Very soon, the flames caught the spider. He wanted to verify whether he could condense this kind of stimulation into ink-heavy darkness. The entire place fell silent. Before the others had even realized what happened, the barrier had already been broken by him. Lee Se-hoon was equally excited inwardly, because he could finally refine ink-heavy darkness. When the test ended, Lee Se-hoon turned and left. The answer he wanted was already enough, and there was no meaning in staying here. One examiner glanced at the time, about 7 minutes 45 seconds. But another chief examiner felt that this was unimportant. This time it was 7 minutes, but the next time Lee Se-hoon encountered the same barrier, he would break it in seconds. Because he had not merely broken one barrier, but had derived an entirely new dismantling formula on the spot. Eric gave Lee Se-hoon a meaningful look, and to her own surprise felt a little excited. If Lee Se-hoon fused ritual art into forging, then the weapon he would ultimately forge would be something even she would fear. Not long afterward, Lee Se-hoon submitted an application for intermediate forging. Any mentor willing to guide him could contact him. The teacher who helped submit it had originally assumed no one would respond. But only 3 minutes after the notice went out, the list was already overflowing. Thinking of Vice Dean Michael's side, where not a single person had shown up, the gap was glaring, and his son had even been squeezed down below 10th place, making his expression even uglier. Just as he was about to pick a mentor at random, his pupils suddenly contracted. Because the department head had indicated, she would personally observe student Lee Se-hoon's intermediate forging. That very afternoon, Lee Se-hoon looked at Ryu Eun-ha helplessly. He really had not expected that she would be so busy and still come specially for something like this. She claimed with her mouth that she was here to inspect his strength, but Lee Se-hoon did not believe that at all. He then began the first stage of refinement, ink dark shadow. There were many ways to process it, but the harshest one was the dark shepherd processing method. First, place the ink-heavy substance into a lightless dark space. Then spread the magic power like water and use only magic power to separate the impurities. During the process, the volume shrinks, but the purity surges. It sounded simple, but in practice it was almost equivalent to reconstructing matter. Ryu Eunha stared in a daze. The first stage was over this quickly? So 1/4 was already the limit to which Lee Se-hoon could compress it. Any smaller and the performance would no longer be enough. Very soon, it entered the second stage. This stage was just as critical. The slightest deviation would cause the fire temperature to spiral out of control. In the next moment, Lee Se-hoon poured all the flames into the furnace. Then he circulated Crimson Flame magic and sifted out the correct amount of heat. In this state, the stable flames were called Guardian Wildfire. They locked in the exact temperature from the moment they formed. Soon it came to the third stage. The third stage was to continuously strike the ink dark substance with a hammer wrapped in Guardian Wildfire until the distortion caused by the wildfire trait completely disappeared. Ryu Eunha felt tense inside. Even if Lee Se-hoon was immune to flame, that did not mean he felt no pain. By now, just how much energy had he spent? Next, Lee Se-hoon began reshaping it again and again, forging out the outline of the weapon. In the blink of an eye, several hours passed. Ryu Eunha grew sleepy from watching and could not help yawning. Deep into the night, Ryu Eunha actually fell asleep standing up, and the refining was still continuing. What refinement meant was using a hammer to strike continuously. Lee Se-hoon had already been hammering for well over an hour. The ink-dark substance was compressed to its limit, flames churned inside it, and the material began to undergo a qualitative change. At that very moment, the distortion in the material finally stopped. Afterward, Lee Se-hoon melted the formed ink-dark substance. Ryu Eunha understood a little of the process. Pour the molten material into a pre-prepared mold, using casting rather than forging. But a mold containing such an enormous amount of darkness would inevitably be twisted and deformed by its trait in the end. Just when she thought Lee Se-hoon was about to fail, what she saw nearly made her lose her voice. Lee Se-hoon used barrier-breaking offensive to slow the changes in the darkness within the ink, and within that gap he constructed a magic circuit. In the next moment, the finished product took shape directly. System prompt: Ink Bamboo Bracelet completed. To shatter prejudice, one must sometimes open the way through recklessness. It has not yet fully released the material's potential, but this new possibility itself already surpasses ordinary human achievement. The system prompted again. Lee Se-hoon has obtained the Scale Dark Spirit Dominator, rated D. Only then did Lee Se-hoon let out a long breath. Today had not been for nothing. He had finally made the thing. The finished product was called the Ink Bamboo Bracelet, medium rare quality. Its ability was to absorb and store the wearer's mana, and it could release the skill Explosive Tide Surge. At last, a faint smile appeared at the corner of Lee Se-hoon's mouth. He had succeeded. But in the very next second, as Ryu Eunha looked at the freshly forged item, her stomach gave an untimely growl again. She felt a little embarrassed. She did not want to, but hungry was hungry, and she could not help it. Lee Se-hoon could only pretend he had not heard it. The situation was too awkward. Ryu Eunha asked him, "So this is resonance? It really is astonishing." Lee Se-hoon nodded. He had made 4 of them in total, and although their strength was average, with a little more effort they could even approach the effect of a said bonus. As long as there was a said bonus, this thing's explosive power would be fierce. "You put so much thought into me, yet I can't even get your weapon. Sorry. Take this as compensation. I hope you'll accept it." Ryu Eunha's stomach had growled far too fiercely just now. She was obviously truly starving. Ryu Eunha's ability was extremely powerful, a unique secret art, the Soul Furnace. She then activated her ability and took a bite, and the taste actually suited her perfectly. The texture was like fried batter crumbs, exactly the kind of flavor she liked, to the point that she even felt the coincidence was excessive. What she did not know was that Lee Se-hoon had long been used to adjusting things to her taste, which was why he had naturally made it in a style she loved. That only made it easier to raise her favor toward Lee Se-hoon. But no matter how regrettable it felt, she still could not resist wanting to eat. She could barely suppress her saliva. Ryu Eunha then asked Lee Se-hoon when he would be willing to part with the 5-colored flame blade and flame-layered scabbard. Lee Se-hoon said he was not selling them for now, and Ryu Eunha thought he simply found the price too low. But that was not the truth. He intended to keep them for the upcoming subjugation course. Besides, for someone like you, no matter how good the equipment is, it won't season things as well as an empty stomach. When I have equipment I can let go of, I'll give it to you first. Hearing that, Ryu Eunha was finally completely reassured. I'll wait. And today, this was as far as Lee Se-hoon could forge. Ryu Eunha urged him to hurry back. It was late, and at the very least he should get some rest first. But the moment Lee Se-hoon stood up, his body suddenly swayed and he lost his balance on the spot. Ryu Eunha's figure flashed, and in an instant she was in front of him, catching him in her arms. She frowned and asked, "Are you alright? You've been busy all day. Can't hold on anymore?" This posture made Lee Se-hoon very uncomfortable. He really had overestimated his own stamina. "Sorry to trouble you." Ryu Eunha glanced out the window. "I'll take you back to the dorm." The moment he heard that, Lee Se-hoon immediately refused, and Ryu Eunha thought he was afraid of heights. Lee Se-hoon stammered an explanation. He was not afraid of heights, it was just, wouldn't this posture be too easy to misunderstand? Ryu Eun-ha, however, did not care in the slightest. She directly decided to carry Lee Se-hoon in a princess carry and take him back. The posture was indeed embarrassing, but having someone take him back was still better than collapsing on the spot. Just as they flew up into the air, a woman below looked up at the sky, not knowing that the figures above were two people. She was still waiting there stubbornly, for Lee Se-hoon to keep his appointment. The next day, a piece of news shot to the top of the school's trending list. Eric had stood in front of the forging department's main building for 3 hours yesterday without taking a single step. Lee Se-hoon knew she had come looking for him. If it were really urgent, she would come again later. At that moment, a man wearing a headscarf walked into the classroom. "Everyone, I'm glad to see you. Starting today, I'll be in charge of the tools application course." For his first class, he gave only one sentence. "Everyone, move to the training center. Whoever arrives last, run laps on the track." But Lee Se-hoon remembered clearly that this course was supposed to be a theory class. He could not be bothered to dwell on it, so he decided to head to the training center first. But as he ran, Lee Se-hoon found the distance between himself and the others growing wider and wider. In the end, he became the slowest one and was punished by the teacher with laps. Lee Se-hoon said nothing and simply turned around and continued training. The teacher had never seen a student with stamina this poor, and even wondered how Lee Se-hoon had passed intermediate forging in the first place. After that, the teacher stopped minding him and turned to lecture the others instead. Tools and application had originally been just a theory course on weapon structure, but because of the recent flame blade hunt, the course format had been forcibly adjusted. Those who hunted blacksmiths who forged fire element swords and had reached hero rank or above were collectively called flame blade hunters. Lee Se-hoon had heard of the case even in his previous life. He had not been able to solve it. And the focus of this class was swordsmanship. The teacher told Lee Se-hoon to stop running and come over to listen. He handed Lee Se-hoon a sword. "Let me see whether you're suited for swordsmanship. Swing once first." The sword itself was not heavy, but Lee Se-hoon was wearing the ink bamboo bracelet, so moving lightly was not easy. An idea immediately popped into Lee Se-hoon's head, not refined, but good enough for now. In the next second, he swung his sword, only for the professor to block it effortlessly. Quite a few people laughed on the spot. Isn't he way too slow? Did those laps wear him out? Though his stance is pretty standard. But the professor had a sharp eye. He could tell that Lee Se-hoon's strike was very clean, and that the sword knew where it wanted to cut. Still, he felt Lee Se-hoon was too impatient. Just then, Lee Se-hoon charged up again. At that moment, his eyes changed. When the teacher saw it clearly, his whole body froze in place. Lee Se-hoon slashed with one sword strike, and for that instant it seemed as if he meant to sever the teacher's arm outright. The teacher's heart sank. How could a student possess this kind of killing intent? The professor lost focus for a moment, and Lee Se-hoon's sword was already leveled before his neck. The teacher had never imagined that he would actually be suppressed by the presence of a student. He stared at Lee Se-hoon. "Where did you learn your swordsmanship?" Lee Se-hoon was stunned too. How had that actually worked? He had only pieced that technique together on the spot 10 minutes ago. He hurriedly explained that he had learned it by watching combat videos on social media. Unexpectedly, the professor actually believed him. "You can imitate to this degree? Do you want to study swordsmanship systematically? I'll write you a recommendation letter to take Aikokuf's body control class." That very afternoon, Lee Se-hoon arrived at Aikokuf. But the scene in front of him was painfully awkward. A blonde guy was clinging tightly to the teacher's leg and refusing to let go. The long-haired teacher kept trying to drive him away. "How many times do I have to say it? I have nothing to teach you." And this teacher was a retired S-rank hero. His name was Ma Guangsu, known by the title Swordbreaker. Of course Lee Se-hoon knew him. In his previous life he had been an old drunk, but in this life he had somehow become a professor. Ma Guangsu turned to ask who Lee Se-hoon was and what he wanted. "I'm Lee Se-hoon, a first year from the forging department. I came with Professor Karas's recommendation letter." The blonde guy beside him muttered in a lowered voice, "He's the top student from Bosipa Academy this year." Several people looked Lee Se-hoon up and down. No matter how they looked, he seemed like an ordinary student. Ma Guangsu said to the blonde guy, "You really want to learn my swordsmanship? Fine. There's only one condition. Defeat the guy in front of you first." And Lee Se-hoon also nodded, accepting the duel. The duel rules were simple. One round to decide the winner, and it would end at the first valid hit. And Hans Barmet had already taken an offensive stance. With a shout of "begin," the blonde figure instantly closed in on Lee Se-hoon. Ma Guangsu glanced at Lee Se-hoon. He could sense that Lee Se-hoon had relaxed his whole body, shedding strength and converting it into flexibility. In that situation, the textbook answer was grappling, not a hard clash. That thought had only just flashed through Ma Guangsu's mind when the blonde also made the corresponding countermeasure. Ma Guangsu looked helpless. This was why he hated genius brats. Before the fight even started, they were already playing mind games. How boring. At that moment, Lee Se-hoon also charged at the blonde. But he had not expected that the instant they got close, the blonde would suddenly stop. The blonde bent sharply at the waist and locked both arms tightly around Lee Se-hoon's waist. That strange brute strength startled Lee Se-hoon. Lee Se-hoon immediately detonated the mana burst inside the bracelet. Bang! With a loud crack, Lee Se-hoon smashed a fist into the blonde's nose bridge. The blonde's face was full of disbelief. Why had Lee Se-hoon's speed suddenly become so fast? Lee Se-hoon looked toward Ma Guangsu and laughed once. Does that count as my win now? Ma Guangsu let out a sigh. Starting tomorrow, you come train. The blonde was overjoyed on the spot. I'll definitely be here on time tomorrow. That included Lee Se-hoon as well. He too would come to the sword hall tomorrow. The blonde bowed, turned, and left. Ma Guangsu told Lee Se-hoon to wait a moment, saying he wanted to talk privately. He wanted to see the swordsmanship Lee Se-hoon had used when sparring with Karis. Lee Se-hoon nodded. Understood. I'll demonstrate it now. In the next moment, Lee Se-hoon rushed toward Ma Guangsu. But with just a casual strike, Ma Guangsu shut down his offense completely. Lee Se-hoon's expression stiffened slightly. This was what being instantly killed looked like. Ma Guangsu's evaluation was blunt. The idea was good, but the execution was too crude. A sword technique that turns into a weakness from the second use onward, is that normal? If you dared teach that move to someone else, I'd have broken all 4 of your limbs already. But what he did not know was that in Lee Se-hoon's previous life, the one who had taught him that move was Ma Guangsu himself. Ma Guangsu said coldly, wait, he would build Lee Se-hoon a body worthy of that rough technique. Lee Se-hoon took his leave. I'll be here on time tomorrow. Ma Guangsu snorted inwardly. This kid really spoke bluntly. When Lee Se-hoon walked out the door, he found that the blonde had not left at all and was still waiting for him at the entrance. The blonde called out to him, saying he had something to give him. What he handed over was an invitation exactly like Eric's, the Noble Society's invitation. That place was basically a gathering spot for students from prestigious families. So Eric had been looking for Lee Se-hoon to give him this. The blonde said that although there were many annoying people there, it was still an opportunity for Lee Se-hoon. He was also very grateful to Lee Se-hoon. If not for this duel, he never would have gotten into this class, so he had to show at least this much sincerity. Lee Se-hoon thanked him. The blonde was actually fairly easy to get along with and not a bad person. At this point, Lee Se-hoon's minors were barrier construction and physical control, and he was still considering adding another one over at Bolsipa. Just then, someone stopped him. The person grabbed his arm at once. Excuse me, can we talk? When Lee Se-hoon saw who it was, his eyes shook instantly. The girl stared at the bracelet on his hand. This bracelet of yours, did you make it yourself? Lee Se-hoon nodded. I made it. What is it? What do you want? She was practically drooling. It was the first time she had seen such an exquisitely made weapon in a student's hands. Could you let me enchant it? System prompt. A contract has been established with target Leah. Her name was Leah Crodell, someone who could forcibly raise a weapon's grade by 2 levels through enchantment. A genius among geniuses, she was even called the one who ruined the enchantment industry. In the next moment, she suddenly cried out, this is actually made from rare-grade heavy ore. She stared at the bracelet for a long time, muttering nonstop. If I add a few formulas here, then it ends like this? No, the enchantment effect would be too weak. The more she looked, the more she tugged at her hair. She had no idea how to choose. Even Lee Se-hoon had not expected her personality to be this strange. The problem was not whether the equipment was good enough, but that Leah wanted to stuff too many things into it. Heavy ore, however, had absurd compatibility, and could hold so many formulas that it drove her to the brink. Lee Se-hoon slowly set down the cup in his hand. If it was only for experimentation, then there was no problem. Because he had more than one bracelet like this, and Leah could use them for repeated trials. That point made Leah tremble with excitement. She could already imagine herself going mad deriving formulas next. Just as Lee Se-hoon and Leah were talking, another person stepped out from behind them. That person slapped a hand down on the table. I have something to say to you. Come with me. His tone was commanding. Lee Se-hoon found it very unpleasant. Lee Se-hoon immediately thought, this should be someone from Eric's side. Seeing that he did not move, the other man's voice grew heavier. Didn't you hear me? Lee Se-hoon replied coldly. If there was something to say it here. The man sighed and said he had come to make Lee Se-hoon apologize to Eric. Didn't you tear up the invitation Miss gave you in public? Eric told me to tear it at the time. What does that have to do with me? But the man did not care about any of that. Whether he was right or wrong, Lee Se-hoon still had to go apologize. That only made Lee Se-hoon more uncomfortable. Had Eric sent him? Lee Se-hoon shook his head. This is my own decision and has nothing to do with Miss Eric. Hearing that, Leah beside him adjusted her glasses. Drop the act. Everyone knows by now that you're the young master's servant. So Eric had an older brother, and this man belonged to him. The man's expression changed instantly. His identity had been exposed directly. In the next second, his aura burst outward. He also knew Leah. How could a washed-up woman still dare act so tough? Was she still living in a fantasy? But his pressure had no effect on Lee Se-hoon at all. He was still preaching there. Babel has countless geniuses. People stronger than you are everywhere. Telling you to go apologize to the young miss is a blessing for you. Lee Se-hoon exposed him with a single sentence. What you're describing is yourself, isn't it? The man's composure shattered completely, and he directly summoned demonic wolves to pounce and kill. Lee Se-hoon merely raised a hand. Facing the demonic wolves, he did not even take a step back. With a casual wave, all the demonic wolves vanished. Sure enough, these were not pure mana constructs. You used a dagger as a medium, so the illusions could also cause damage, right? The man's pupils contracted sharply. How do you know that? Lee Se-hoon spun the dagger between his fingers. This kind of trick was far too shallow in his eyes. Since the other side had made the first move, his counterattack was only justified. System prompt: Bond Mark Gluttonous Iron Blade has been activated. Lee Se-hoon wiped the crumbs from the corner of his mouth. This dagger tasted awful. This ability came from the greedy iron he had extracted from the beautiful professor, top quality, capable of devouring iron. In the next second, Lee Se-hoon burst forward. He activated Burst Ring and drove a punch into the man's abdomen. And with a loud clang, the mirror space shattered directly. This level of trickery was utterly worthless before him. Then he turned his head to look at Leah, and asked whether she had any recommended enchantment courses. I want to learn too. I heard there's a very strong senior over an ancient enchantment named Leah Crodell. Not long afterward, the man clutched his stomach and limped away. Just then, a figure stopped him. Excuse me, I'd like to take a look at that dagger. The person who had come was Eric. The man immediately handed over the dagger respectfully. Eric coldly instructed him not to report this matter to her brother. She would personally inform the family head herself. Sure enough, just as she had expected, the medium dagger was engraved with anti-confiscation enchantment. Eric was even more puzzled. Had Lee Se-hoon really combined Professor Robert's theories with her witchcraft and directly created a countermeasure? In her mind, she made a judgment about Lee Se-hoon. His aptitude for refinement technology was at least B rank, and his aptitude for witchcraft was probably S rank or above. Very soon, Lee Se-hoon received a prompt. You have established a connection with a no-way Eric. He was baffled. How had he suddenly linked with Eric's bond? Could it be that she had watched the whole fight from the shadows just now? But it did not matter. He had already gotten his reward, the medium he had taken from the other side. Using it directly would be too crude, but paired with the Black Spirit Mage, it could be useful. More importantly, Lee Se-hoon had actually been looking forward to Professor Kim In-cheol's class, but in the end he still had to listen again and again to theories he had long understood, which annoyed him to no end. That explanation was enough. Lee Se-hoon decided to move directly into practice. With the same metal, simply adjusting the mana array could completely alter its form. And the application of form conversion determined how far a weapon could go. So a blacksmith had to thoroughly understand the full potential of metal. Professor Kim lightly swept his palm, and the lump of iron that had just become a weapon instantly returned to its original state. Today's exercise was metal deformation using this ingot. First, control the mana array to create a 3 cm indentation in the center of the ingot, then restore it. The teaching assistant handed each person a block of iron. One reminder: the iron has already been tuned to be extremely sensitive to deformation, so be careful when handling it. Lee Se-hoon looked at Professor Kim and fell into brief thought. It seemed that in the end, he had not completely rejected magical refinement. After class began, the whole room was a disaster. Some students turned their iron into a puddle of water, while others made bizarre monstrosities. Professor Kim's face darkened from watching, and on top of that, they could not restore the iron to its original form. Just then, Lee Se-hoon handed his completed iron block to Professor Kim, while extending his other hand to signal for inspection. Hans gave Lee Se-hoon a chuckling smile. I didn't expect your speed to be about the same as mine. Have you been practicing in secret too? Professor Kim had not expected that only 2 people in the entire class would complete the first stage. Then the 2 of you may proceed to the next stage. He demonstrated a sample array on the spot and told them to reproduce the same shape by following it. The 2 of them kept rewriting the internal form of the iron block as if twisting a Rubik's Cube. Hans even glanced at Lee Se-hoon. He felt that Lee Se-hoon was slightly slower than him in both speed and completeness, so this was in the bag. After finishing, the professor gave them a second shape. Hans moved his hands extremely fast, and the iron block quickly took shape. He showed a satisfied smile. I really am a genius. This shape looks perfect from every angle. Professor Kim's tone remained calm. Hans, restore the iron block to its original state. Hans froze. Why do I have to restore it now? But he still did as told, and soon his expression changed, because the mana array had already been completely destroyed. Only then did Professor Kim explain that iron ingot could not withstand the transformation just now, which meant his method had been wrong from the start, but Hans refused to accept it. I clearly did it the way Professor taught. The professor emphasized again, a blacksmith must grasp the potential of metal. If you cannot repair the rewritten array, then that is not transformation, but degradation. From now on, you must treat quality and performance as the primary variables and inspect them one by one. Hans glared at Lee Se-hoon in irritation. Had this guy discovered that earlier? Impossible. He had looked as if he were just standing there spacing out. In the next moment, Lee Se-hoon's fingertips moved rapidly. The mana array was swiftly rewritten back, and the iron block in his hands kept deforming and correcting itself. Before long, the iron ingot returned to its original form. The other students were all dumbstruck. Even Professor Kim stared fixedly at Lee Se-hoon. "Can you show that transformation sequence again?" Lee Se-hoon felt a little troubled. It seemed Professor Kim had misunderstood. He could restore it because this iron ingot had been sensitivity tuned. If it were an ordinary ingot, doing this would have been impossible. In the next moment, Lee Se-hoon still made the shape again and restored it. Only then did the professor realize, so the key lay in the sensitivity-tuned material. It was clearly a simple principle, yet Professor Kim had failed to notice it just now. The strongest blacksmith to ever pass through all the floors, Flame Craftsman Kentz, who had created the transformation formula back when he was an S-rank hero, had left a formula that no one had been able to break for many years. And the transformation formula was precisely the fundamental problem no blacksmith could avoid. Class ended soon after, and Professor Kim deliberately kept Lee Se-hoon behind. He handed Lee Se-hoon a rare ore that glowed red all over, as an entrance gift. By choosing Babel, Lee Se-hoon had also helped him greatly. System prompt: Flame Gemstone, rare quality, contains highly purified energy. Absorbing the essence of the flame gemstone can permanently strengthen the power of Crimson Flame. Professor Kim had specially prepared it after hearing that Lee Se-hoon controlled flames. Lee Se-hoon's heart sank. This gift was too valuable, and he truly did need it. Besides that, Professor Kim also asked Lee Se-hoon whether he was interested in one of the electives he taught. If Lee Se-hoon had guessed correctly, it was Weapon Origins. Professor Kim had not expected that Lee Se-hoon would actually know about it. Lee Se-hoon nodded. It was one of Babel's best-funded courses. Still, Lee Se-hoon hesitated as well. Before his rebirth, he had never even heard the name Kim In-cheol, which suggested that this professor's fate in his previous life had probably not been a good one. But right now he really was in great demand, so in the end, Lee Se-hoon still enrolled. The two of them shook hands firmly. "I look forward to working with Professor Kim from now on." System prompt: Affinity extracted from target Professor Kim. Connection level with blacksmith Lee Se-hoon is 1. Lee Se-hoon obtained flame infusion once again, and also gained a new trait. He could store more flame inside metal. If metal could be extracted from the human body, then a person's body could likewise be forged and processed. Multiple elemental mana attributes inside the body would conflict with one another. For a blacksmith who required precise operation, this was a fatal problem. So most people could only choose the single attribute most compatible with them. But Lee Se-hoon was different. The mana in his body that had been used to suppress heat had already been deliberately consumed by him to the critical point. A body that had been drained dry was now devouring the essence of Crimson Flame in reverse. As a blacksmith, what Lee Se-hoon had to do was build inside his body a mana circuit dedicated solely to serving Crimson Flame. He let out a long breath. In the end, he began forging himself. System prompt: Lee Se-hoon's elemental mana has been strengthened, and Crimson Flame has risen from F rank to E rank. Prompt after prompt popped up. He obtained Refinement Divine Art, S rank, and all his attributes increased significantly. But Refinement Divine Art was still too difficult for this body. He had not even had the chance to truly test it on actual materials even once. Someone had told Lee Se-hoon in his previous life, every usable resource should be used to forge the body. So in this life, he would stake every resource on this step and complete it. Whether that meant future allies or future enemies. This time, he would leave no regrets. On the second day, Lee Se-hoon returned to the teaching building once again. What had to be done this time was the final finishing work on the pieces before handing them over for off-campus delivery. Everyone once again fell into a frenzy of hammering iron. Lee Se-hoon only felt that his body was in total chaos, his rhythm completely unable to keep up, his movements out of sync at every turn. But he had no time at all to adjust slowly now. No matter how overloaded his body became, the hammer in his hand never stopped. After shaping a sword, he threw it straight into a bucket to quench and cool it. Soon, he let out a long breath. The sword before him should be good enough. He had no time to worry about the rest. If he completed everything to standard, he might secure a larger budget. But rather than divide his attention, it was better to bring even a single piece to the utmost limit. He began sharpening and polishing this weapon. In the blink of an eye, 2 hours passed. This time, Lee Se-hoon heard the sound of waves again. It was the echo of the world cracking apart. Whenever he heard that sound, he knew he was forging something extraordinary. Not temporary sharpness, but a cold blade intent carved into the very body of the sword. And on Lee Se-hoon's sword, a white light appeared. This sword was called the White Light Greatsword. A true master blacksmith could drive willing to steel through pure fundamentals alone. And Lee Se-hoon also learned White Light Sword form, C rank. the system's evaluation of the sword. Its rank remained rare. When infused with mana, its sharpness could be increased. Considering that Lee Se-hoon had used nothing but ordinary iron ore, this result was already acceptable. The skills he had possessed before his return were slowly reviving, and that made him even more expectant. The others were not so fortunate. They found it too difficult, and some even wanted to drop out altogether. Morning came on the second day. Lee Se-hoon had arranged to meet Leah here because he wanted to see her enchanting process with his own eyes. To keep her parents and outsiders from seeing it, Leah had deliberately hidden herself away in a remote place. Enchantment was everything to her, and she absolutely could not let others learn it, except for Lee Se-hoon. A moment later, they arrived at the Akakoff smithy. Leah shouted inside, "Grandma, we've got a guest at home. Come out and receive him." Her grandmother nearly had her eardrums blasted. "I'm not deaf. Why are you yelling so loudly?" When Grandma saw Lee Se-hoon, her face filled with surprise. "Who's this boy? Don't tell me he's your boyfriend." Leah could not be bothered to respond. Lee Se-hoon introduced himself. "I'm Lee Se-hoon, first place in the Bolsipa division." Only then did he learn that Grandma's name was Helena. Grandma urged Leah not to waste time and to get to work quickly so they could clock out earlier. There were many freshmen this week, and the workload was piled up like a mountain. Leah then led Lee Se-hoon toward the workshop dedicated to enchantment. Lee Se-hoon glanced at the tools hanging on the wall, and his heart sank. This old lady's craftsmanship was even tougher than he had imagined. He could not understand why someone this skilled would stay in a place like this running a hardware shop. He also saw something like a cosmetic color palette. It was powder made by grinding mana stones. Lee Se-hoon had heard that the standard was to use only one color, but she had an absurd number of colors here. Could it be that she used them to repair damaged enchantment formulas? Leah gave a dry laugh. "You guessed right. This way, she could make money, practice enchantment whenever she wanted, and never have to worry too much about material costs." It suited her perfectly. She held a pen in her hand and slowly drew a pattern on a pot. Immediately afterward, a golden light lit up from the bottom of the pot. Lee Se-hoon had come here because he had heard they were recently stuck in a slump. The man he had beaten earlier had spoken harshly, someone who failed exams every time and could not even keep the department chair position. But after seeing it with his own eyes, Lee Se-hoon instead understood the reason for the slump, and also saw the breakthrough point. To be able to focus on one thing to this degree was itself a talent. While Leah was busy, Lee Se-hoon casually wandered around nearby. Very soon, he saw materials that could resonate with mana circuits and grant special effects. Lee Se-hoon's fingers started itching. Engraving white light one more time was something he had not done in far too long. Grandma behind him spoke up. "Try it." She said that if Lee Se-hoon had the skill, he could pick any one thing he wanted from that pile. Even if he used up a custom whetstone of that level, she would not care. Then Lee Se-hoon turned his gaze to the weapon rack. He reached out and picked up an ordinary dagger. Grandma was somewhat surprised. "You're choosing that?" The blade axis was perfectly aligned, without the slightest distortion, something that looked fit for a person who truly understood knives. As for the whetstone, Lee Se-hoon chose the one with the most evenly compressed mana particles. With his control, even if he sharpened to the limit, he could still keep it stable. Then Lee Se-hoon began sharpening the blade. Grandma stared blankly. Was this really a freshman who had only just entered school this year? At the same time, Leah shouted from behind him, "Finally finished." The moment she looked up and saw Grandma, she could tell at once that Grandma's expression was obviously wrong. Leah reacted instantly. "Did you try to make things difficult for a junior and end up getting taught a lesson instead?" Grandma raised a hand and punched her on the head. "Shut up. Don't disturb him while he's working." Another hour passed, and Lee Se-hoon finally finished. This was the best state he could achieve right now, but next time, he would do even better. After hearing that sentence, Grandma directly drove both of them out the door. Leah looked speechless. Why is she angry again? I can't stand it. Let's go. After the two left, Grandma stared at the blade in silence for a long time. At that moment, another middle-aged man came in, yet he called Grandma older sister. Grandma told him to keep his voice down. The reason he had come was to ask where the kitchen knives were. The two immediately started bickering again. "When are you going to quit that restaurant job? You're the chief professor of the swordsmanship department, and yet you're hiding in a kitchen?" The man could not be bothered to pay attention to his sister, but soon noticed the knife on the table. In the next second, his expression stiffened and his whole body froze in place. Their gazes instantly turned serious. "Did you sharpen this while drunk?" But Grandma said she didn't do anything. Then could it have been those Tachis close to her who had done it? Had their craftsmanship improved again? But Grandma gave an answer he could not accept. This blade had been sharpened by a freshman. The man was obviously unconvinced, but Grandma emphasized again, "I have no reason to lie to you. He really is a freshman this year." Assassin Lee Se-hoon became even more mysterious in their minds. What exactly was this freshman's background? After leaving the smithy, Lee Se-hoon and Leah wandered around campus casually. He learned that Lia's grandmother had once been a professor in the metallurgy department and had only opened the hardware shop after retiring earlier this year. Over the past 10 years, the metallurgy department had lost quite a few professors, and in the future it would become Babel's weakest department. Lia did not want to talk about any of that. She only wanted to know how the enchantment effect was. Lee Se-hoon said her fundamentals were extremely solid, and there was almost nothing to criticize. She spoke modestly, but her expression could no longer hide her pride. But Lee Se-hoon still pointed out her weakness. You clearly thought of a better path, but you didn't take it. If you can't do something, you can learn, but if you already can and still refuse to do it, that's the real problem. A creator's imagination is both weapon and talent, and you're suppressing it. Lia flared up on the spot. You think I don't know that? At that moment, Lee Se-hoon slipped a hand into his coat. He handed her a dagger. I don't have much time, so listen carefully and focus. If someone says sinking a stone underwater, then forging is creating that stone and placing it there. Then magic is carving the shadow of that underwater stone above the water's surface. That's why magic feels like a dream. At that moment, flames like a red lotus rose from the dagger. Immediately afterward, white vapor threaded with gray currents wrapped around it. Enhancement is not painted onto the surface, but driven into the inside. If one layer is not enough, then stack layer upon layer. Only that way can enchantment reach its strongest state. Then Lee Se-hoon gave the little blade a light swing, and with a casual flick, the dagger pinned itself into the nearby tree trunk. The instant the blade pierced the trunk, the white vapor on the sword body moved. A white flash shot into the sky, and the leaves were sliced cleanly in half. This did not count as formal enchantment, but Lee Se-hoon believed she would understand it. Even if a genius hesitated, they could still pave their own road. As if she had caught the key point, Lia asked whether Lee Se-hoon could lend her that dagger. She promised she would make it even more perfect and return it to him personally. Lee Se-hoon did not mind. He had plenty of daggers anyway. Lia laughed loudly. Thank you, I love you so much. Before Lee Se-hoon could react, her figure had already vanished from his sight. System prompt, Lee Se-hoon has formed a connection with Lia, level 1. Lee Se-hoon let out a low laugh. He had not expected his connection with her to come so easily. And today, he finally saw one of the three hounds, the battle between the young mad dog and the extermination demon god. But what left Lee Se-hoon speechless was that Eric was still following behind him. Lee Se-hoon told her she had better leave. The feeling of being watched was terrible. Eric said she could leave, but she would continue observing him from a distance. Lee Se-hoon extracted the ore from her bond. It was an association contact stone, a high-grade ore of medium-low quality. He also extracted Lia Crowdle's ore, also high-grade, but of the highest quality. And at that moment, the ranking match for the Marshall Hall's Battle of Glory began, and the two people in the arena prepared to fight. The host was the youngest professor in the Marshall department, named Blue Side. The first to appear today was a powerful fourth-year student aiming for the peak of the Ackle Cup, the heir of the Imale family, famed for continuously cultivating S-rank heroes. She had maintained an S-rank standing in the Marshall Hall for 3 consecutive years and kept breaking records, an active A-rank hero and champion of the Marshall Hall. Her name was Thalia Myers, and she had already conquered the Hero Tower's Holy Sword Master. When she appeared, Lee Se-hoon had little reaction. He was not familiar with her. And the person Lee Se-hoon was truly waiting for was about to step up, the inheritor of Korea's intangible cultural heritage Fire Dragon Withered Flower Spear, the top-ranked third year in the Spear Arts Department, 11th in the Marshall Hall rankings, a star in the process of igniting. At this point, the corner of Lee Se-hoon's mouth finally lifted. As expected, they had met again. Mad Dog, Lee Se-hoon's partner in his previous life. Without him, Lee Se-hoon would never have reached the end. Soon, Mad Dog and Talia exchanged blows. Though the opponent was clearly a woman, the strength she erupted with made even Mad Dog's heart tremble. He immediately spun his long spear and shifted through moves one after another. But Talia did not take him seriously at all. With a casual slash of her sword, several flaming strikes shot straight at Mad Dog. Mad Dog reacted extremely fast, sweeping his spear and blocking all the flames. But Talia stood with one hand behind her back, and with another slash, a fresh wave of strikes came again. Even if Mad Dog was still young, this performance was ridiculously low. Had he, as the inheritor of the Withered Flower Spear, not received the support he deserved? Many things left Lee Se-hoon confused, but the biggest problem was that weapon. At this moment, Mad Dog's eyes turned icy. He was going to get serious. But in the next second, the sword tip was already pressed to his throat. The difference in strength was like an abyss. He could only concede. Talia smiled with ease. You're actually not weak either. Try a little harder, and maybe you'll make me use 50% of my strength. That's when I'll start taking it seriously. The whole audience erupted in cheers. Talia's strength was so oppressive it left people unable to breathe. The host prepared to interview the two of them, but student Sonha left the stage early for some reason. Talia still could not suppress her smile. Even if I challenged 9th place next, it would still be difficult, so I need to preserve my strength. Under Talia's halo, Mad Dog seemed dim and insignificant. Lee Se-hoon could also tell this brat's emotions were already in a dangerous state, so Lee Se-hoon turned and left immediately, and Eric was somewhat surprised. "You're leaving without watching to the end?" Lee Se-hoon said he had no interest in this kind of battle. Because he found the blonde on stage annoying, just looking at him was irritating. Eric sensed Lee Se-hoon's anger. At least he had not come to watch her brother. At that moment, she heard a voice, an interesting freshman. It was Talia speaking, and her gaze was fixed tightly in the direction Lee Se-hoon had left. After the match, Lee Se-hoon found Mad Dog in a nearby parking lot. A still-living Yeom Seon-ha was pitiful. Even if his personality was terrible, he had been the core of the Death Squad, and in the end a hero who exchanged his life for the chance to bring down the great demon king of Ruhai. Lee Se-hoon had to obtain affinity from him before he completely lost control. He opened by asking Seon-ha whether he had seen that match just now. "You actually managed to find me? You've got some skill." But in the next second, Mad Dog sensed that something was off. The person in front of him looked like the top student of the Bolsipa division. So why was he here? Lee Se-hoon felt a bit awkward for a moment and did not understand why his reaction was so intense. "I want to talk to Mad Dog for a while." Mad Dog roared, "Get lost. I don't want to talk to anyone right now." No matter what Lee Se-hoon said, Mad Dog told him to leave immediately, even when Lee Se-hoon said this conversation would benefit him. Mad Dog said coldly that he hated weaklings, especially those who had accomplished nothing yet dared, on the strength of a little mediocrity, to think they stood beside him. "So save whatever you wanted to say. Go home. You're just a blacksmith." Lee Se-hoon fell silent. Thinking of the Mad Dog from his previous life, this version of him was already being polite. Before, he had spoken even more harshly. Red mana rose over Lee Se-hoon's hand. It seemed that without using some methods, there would be no way to talk. Mad Dog's eyes turned even colder. "You're not planning to back off?" Lee Se-hoon gave a low laugh. "Let me tell you one thing. The inheritance of the Firewheel Spear will break in your hands." Mad Dog's expression froze instantly. His body flickered, as if leaving an afterimage in place. In the next second, his real body was already right in front of Lee Se-hoon, killing intent pressing in. He threw a punch without the slightest mercy. But Lee Se-hoon saw through his trajectory. No matter what, the punch would not be able to touch him. The two separated at first contact. Lee Se-hoon did not press the fight. He had not come here to bro, but to pull Mad Dog back. But this single simple block still shook Mad Dog inwardly. He had actually blocked a punch infused with his mana. The title of top student was no empty one. Mad Dog's opinion of Lee Se-hoon began to waver. Maybe they really could talk. Faint traces of mana still lingered in the air. In the next moment, the two figures crashed together once more. A huge fiery shockwave blasted Mad Dog straight backward. When the smoke cleared, Lee Se-hoon stood there completely unharmed. Mad Dog was even more shocked. Those leftover traces should have reacted only to his own mana, so why were they in Lee Se-hoon's hands? Had they been blocked or stolen? He attacked again in an instant. Lee Se-hoon laughed softly. This guy really had been lit on fire. Mad Dog unleashed his full aura, and purple mana surged from his body. The massacre of the Flame Flower School back then might well have been caused by this exact temper. He clenched his fists, and his knuckles cracked loudly. A series of heavy punches smashed against Lee Se-hoon's arms, and the effect of Seeker of Steel was nearly forced to its limit. When Mad Dog's fist once again came crashing toward Lee Se-hoon's face, Lee Se-hoon's heart sank. Since resolving this peacefully was impossible, then he would have to break him apart. But this punch was forcibly stopped by a single hand. The newcomer was Blondie, Talia's younger brother. Mad Dog knew him too, and even asked whether he knew the top student of the Bolsipa division. Mad Dog slowly withdrew his hand. "You too, leave." Blondie immediately pushed Lee Se-hoon away. "Leave first. Don't provoke Mad Dog any further." Lee Se-hoon still wanted Mad Dog to remember that sentence, but before he could speak, Blondie cut him off. "Stop talking. Go." After the two left, Mad Dog fell into self-reproach. "I almost went too far in a moment of impulse and shamed my master." But he had already remembered the name Lee Se-hoon. After leaving, Blondie kept pressing Lee Se-hoon for why he had provoked that senior. If he had not intervened, Lee Se-hoon really might have died. Lee Se-hoon told him not to talk nonsense. He could not possibly have died, though it would indeed have been dangerous. System prompt. Lee Se-hoon has established a connection with target Yeom Seon-ha. Affinity extraction can now be performed. But the Mad Dog Lee Se-hoon knew was far more than this. If he became gentle, the effect of the bond stone might change. Lee Se-hoon had to raise Yeom Seon-ha's affinity level even higher. That said, the blonde beside him really was quite useful. He just did not know whether his hand was hurt. Blondie laughed loudly. "I'm fine. My hands are harder than the rest of me." But then his tone suddenly darkened. "More importantly, do you know someone's already got their eye on you?" He asked Lee Se-hoon, back in the arena. "Did you say something about my sister?" Lee Se-hoon's next sentence stunned him. "Nothing much. I just said she was kind of a bastard." No wonder his sister had kept asking Blondie all kinds of questions. Blondie's face changed. My sister is interested in you now. You're finished. Lee Se-hoon had not expected her hearing to be that sharp. From that far away, she had still heard. Blondie sighed. My sister is an S-rank hero. You really underestimated an S-rank's 5 senses. Blondie reminded Lee Se-hoon not to dismiss it lightly. You may not know this, but my sister, Lee Se-hoon directly cut in. Your sister is petty and likes to play dirty, right? That sentence nearly scared Blondie to death. Blondie frantically looked around in every direction, and only relaxed after confirming his sister was not nearby. What exactly did my sister do to you for you to hate her this much? Holy Sword St. Talia Myers. Lee Se-hoon admitted that she was absurdly strong, and back then she had even obtained the Holy Sword. But that Holy Sword meant nothing to her, and she simply gave it up. One day, the Holy Sword wielder suddenly disappeared without leaving a single word. The one who appeared in her place was someone who used the remains of a demon god as a sword, the extinguishing light demon god. Her face was exactly the same as Talia's. Lee Se-hoon exhaled lightly. I don't mean anything else by it. I just hate that face. He waved a hand at Blondie and prepared to leave. Blondie did not believe him. He was convinced that something must have happened between Lee Se-hoon and his sister. Then a text message popped up on Blondie's phone. His sister wrote, "Looks like I've made an interesting friend. From now on, I'll keep telling you things about him." In other words, Blondie had been forcibly turned into a middleman. Then she sent another message. From your scheming big sister. I'm asking for your help, you know. Blondie froze completely. Could it be that his sister had heard their entire conversation just now? Time quickly reached the next day. Perhaps Lee Se-hoon had pushed Mad Dog too hard yesterday. Hans, sitting in front of Lee Se-hoon, looked displeased. I'm definitely going to surpass you today. A very small old man came in a wheelchair. His name was Doba, and for the next 2 weeks he would be teaching the major course, with the topic being attribute forging. The whole class looked unhappy. This was that professor infamous for being crazy. Before class starts, I'll hand out a few things. Last week's evaluation of your major forging works, and the first semester budget. When your name is called, come up one by one and take it. Lee Se-hoon was the last one called, and some people guessed he would get triple the budget. But no one had expected it. Lee Se-hoon's budget was actually 0. The professor explained that Lee Se-hoon's work was so highly completed that they had decided to exhibit it together with the second year's works at Wednesday's public auction. The budget would be determined by the final bid, so he had to wait for now. Lee Se-hoon more or less understood. This was most likely Vice Dean Michael's doing. But if there had really been a problem, Professor Kim would have stopped it long ago. Lee Se-hoon nodded. Understood. I'll wait. Today's lesson was about handling residual mana. The professor said a student had volunteered to assist. Lee Se-hoon had not expected it. The one who came was actually Mad Dog. He really was shaken for a moment. Mad Dog had come specifically to find him. The professor gave a brief introduction of Mad Dog, then explained the concepts before practice began. When forging weapons, residual mana mainly falls into 2 types. The first is the basic charge type. The second is the independent type, which can generate mana on its own or absorb it from the air. Each has its own advantages, but the independent type is far more difficult. Because there is no fixed standard for a mana core, it changes depending on the materials, the technique, and the creator's mana. The professor looked at the assistant and had him demonstrate first. You'll start with the charge type. Gradually, a mass of red mana rose in Mad Dog's hand. Fire element mana was extremely unstable, making the use of residual mana very difficult. And what Mad Dog displayed was the most typical example, the Flame Wheel Blooming Spear. The whole class could hardly believe it. Controlling fire element mana to this degree was beyond them, when they were barely managing to control the furnace fire. The professor picked up the remote and continued. Since you have such a strong teaching assistant, don't waste the chance. The assignment is due next Thursday. You're free to be creative, but it must revolve around the topic written on the blackboard. Afterward, the professor led them to the forging room. Don't forget to change clothes. Everyone felt this was an opportunity. The star figure was right in front of them. Even Hans wanted to rush up and say hello. Just exchanging a sentence with Mad Dog would be worth it. But the moment Hans walked up to Mad Dog threw out one sentence. Get lost. I hate weaklings. Hans could only retreat in embarrassment. Not just him, the others were the same. The excitement from just now was instantly extinguished. And at this moment, Mad Dog was staring fixedly in Lee Se-hoon's direction. Lee Se-hoon ignored him and walked straight toward the door. But Mad Dog shouted to stop him. You, stand right there. Mad Dog asked how much Lee Se-hoon actually knew about him, and Lee Se-hoon answered honestly. I heard that Mad Dog's level is judged by how many wheels he can maintain at the same time. The current sect master, A-rank hero Lee Won-ryong, can reach 8 wheels. You just maintain 3 very easily, so if you push yourself a bit more, you can probably maintain 5 at once. Mad Dog chased after Lee Se-hoon. So what? I still haven't become stronger. One sentence from Lee Se-hoon rooted him to the spot. You once reached 7 wheels, right? Then one day, you suddenly lost the ability to control them anymore. Mad Dog had never even told the sect master about this, and he could not understand how Lee Se-hoon knew. Lee Se-hoon said that Mad Dog had extremely high talent in fire, but looking at the way his flames flowed, something always felt wrong. It was as if he had plenty in reserve, yet never let it erupt completely. His movements looked perfunctory, as if he were only putting in half his heart. Mad Dog stared at Lee Se-hoon. Do you know the reason? Can you help me? Lee Se-hoon spoke slowly. I have a guess. Mad Dog's face lit up. He really did have a way. But Lee Se-hoon's next sentence choked him off. I can solve it, but I have no reason to tell you. Mad Dog understood. He would not get the answer without paying a price, so he said, tell me, and I'll satisfy 3 of your demands. Lee Se-hoon proposed the first condition. For every piece of advice he gave and every bit of help he offered, Mad Dog had to pay an equivalent price. The second condition, no matter what difficult decision he encountered, Mad Dog had to come discuss it with Lee Se-hoon. Then Lee Se-hoon gave him time to think. If he did not reply before Lee Se-hoon walked into the forge, the deal would be considered void. Mad Dog knew what he wanted and agreed directly, without the slightest hesitation. Lee Se-hoon smiled faintly, still the Mad Dog from his previous life, unchanged in the slightest. Then Lee Se-hoon walked to the furnace and prepared to start work, to everyone's astonishment. He was going to forge directly without even drawing a blueprint? Lee Se-hoon mixed fire attribute ore and dark attribute ore in a ratio of 7:3. Someone immediately commented, if you just throw them in like that, all the elemental mana will disperse. What is a top student like you even doing? Lee Se-hoon ignored them and simply continued heating until elemental mana began to overflow. Then he slowly removed the cloth sack from his hand. With one broad motion, he poured fire-colored magic into the furnace. The professor was shocked. He was already using thermal displacement. No wonder Kim In-cheol had allowed him into the public auction. To others, this looked like ordinary thermal displacement, but what Mad Dog saw might have been an entirely different scene. The more Mad Dog watched, the less he could believe it. At that moment, Lee Se-hoon kept pressing the blower with the tip of his foot. He made the fire attribute mana spread from the inside outward, and the dark attribute mana seep in from the outside inward, maintaining an opposing balance and ultimately forming a complete ring. Only one sentence remained in Mad Dog's mind. I understand now. The secondary attribute mana he had been forbidden to use because it interfered with the solar wheel blooming spear. But when he used it according to this method, his number of wheels dropped back to the 6th wheel. Lee Se-hoon was somewhat surprised, but even so, 5 black flame wheels were still stronger than 7 ordinary wheels. The Flame Sect regularly sent instructors to verify the strength of inheritors who trained outside. Once Mad Dog dropped below 6 wheels, he would lose his status as an inheritor. Lee Se-hoon's heart tightened. Then try it again using your original method. But Mad Dog shook his head. He could not do it anymore. He could no longer control dark attribute mana at all. Lee Se-hoon pressed him on when the instructor would arrive, and Mad Dog said tomorrow, which meant he had no way to fix things today. Losing inheritor status was equivalent to being expelled from the sect. Was there any way to solve it within one day? Lee Se-hoon raised a hand and patted Mad Dog on the shoulder. If you can keep your position as inheritor, are you willing to do anything? Mad Dog had no room to refuse those words. As long as Mad Dog nodded, that was enough. The next second, Lee Se-hoon extracted a piece of ore from Mad Dog's body. It was of ultra-high quality. When flame mana and dark mana coexist, their wavelengths interact, allowing the mana inside to resonate. Lee Se-hoon laughed aloud. With this, the problem could be solved perfectly. First step, he would modify Mad Dog's weapon himself. After that, Lee Se-hoon and Mad Dog went to Akakuf's private training ground. Only the top 100 in the Martial Hall or top 30 in the academy could use it. And this place had another function. The images and colors on the walls could be changed at will. Mad Dog changed the display to look like his own home. Lee Se-hoon laughed once. You're pretty homesick. In fact, it had been a gift from his master, and he used it from time to time. After saying that, Lee Se-hoon wasted no more words and directly began making training tools. With a light flick of his finger, that black stone cracked instantly. Very soon, the weapon was finished. Mad Dog looked surprised. A single short spear was awkward enough already. And now he was supposed to use twin spears? Lee Se-hoon told him that from now on, his left hand was to maintain the flame wheel while his right hand released the dark attribute. Mad Dog took a deep breath. In the next moment, both his hands moved at once as he began trying. But the motion suddenly stopped. He himself did not know what had gone wrong. In truth, it was simple. Unconsciously, he had infused dark mana into his left hand. Mixing multiple attributes together was normally a common phenomenon, but in Mad Dog's case it caused severe interference, because he had spent so long suppressing the dark attribute. So as long as he got used to handling the two at the same time, the first wheel would be very easy for him. Lee Se-hoon even put his own bracelet onto Mad Dog's hand. Mad Dog froze for a moment. As expected, Lee Se-hoon had more than one piece of equipment. 3 hours later, Mad Dog was adapting faster and faster with both hands. Lee Se-hoon also felt relieved inside. The reason this was going so smoothly was because this was a training method the future Mad Dog had personally designed. Let me see just how strong you are right now. Mad Dog switched to breathing mode, and his muscular output doubled. After the training ended, Mad Dog looked blankly at Lee Se-hoon, and Lee Se-hoon stared right back at him. He was gathering data, preparing to custom-make a weapon for Mad Dog. Once the weapon was completed, Mad Dog would be able to control both attributes more easily. This was only one part of Lee Se-hoon's assignment, so he should not expect too much. Mad Dog had not expected a first year to produce some divine weapon anyway. Lee Se-hoon was very curious. Why did Mad Dog insist so strongly on preserving his status as inheritor? Was there another reason? Mad Dog swung the weapon in his hand. It turned out his master wanted him to become sect master. As a disciple, all he had to do was obey his master's orders. Mad Dog was an orphan with no family, adopted and raised by an S-rank hero who was also the first-generation sect master. Though his master had retired due to injury and no longer possessed his former combat strength, as both father and master, his influence over Mad Dog was absolute. At this moment, the bond level between Lee Se-hoon and Mad Dog was only level 3. If it were higher, perhaps he could extract even stronger or... Mad Dog still did not understand. Why are you helping me? Lee Se-hoon thought for a moment. He needed a reason that would hold up. Otherwise Mad Dog would definitely become suspicious. The 6 great demonic domains, the devouring land of the myriad demon swamp, where tens of thousands of monsters run rampant. I plan to travel through those demon realms. For that, I need guards, and I also need materials to forge the weapons I'll hand to them. The next sect master of the Flame sect has both strength and wealth, so I chose to form an alliance with you. We haven't known each other long. You don't think I devote myself to you for free, do you? Don't be naive. Mad Dog lifted the weapon in his hand. He really was not naive, and since Lee Se-hoon wanted him to contribute, then a price had to be paid. He made only one request: help him take the position of sect master. Afterward, he would accompany Lee Se-hoon into the 6 great demonic domains. Lee Se-hoon stared into Mad Dog's eyes, as expected, not changed at all, still the Mad Dog he knew. In his previous life, Mad Dog had said the same thing: you forge weapons for me, and I'll cut down demon gods for you. Thinking of his past life and this life overlapping, Lee Se-hoon almost laughed. He took out that red bead. Are you sure? No regrets? After confirming that Mad Dog would not regret it, Lee Se-hoon poured mana into the bead. Even if you hate me right now, I'll still push you onto the sect master seat. In the blink of an eye, more than an hour passed. At that moment, a 7-wheel instructor stepped into the training ground. Kong Hyunwoo of the Flame sect. Mad Dog spoke coldly. Who are they? Disciples chosen by the main family. The head of the family sent them to watch our spar and broaden their horizons. But before Kong Hyunwoo could finish, Mad Dog cut him off. The next family head hasn't been decided yet, so watch your wording. Kong Hyunwoo did not care in the slightest. Then let's test what you can do. Mad Dog refused directly. I'm pushing for the 7th wheel. I don't have time. Kong Hyunwoo was slightly taken aback. A fool who only knew how to train actually dared to covet the position of sect master. But precisely because of that, Kong Hyunwoo had to stop him. In any case, if something went wrong, there would always be someone to cover for him. Kong Hyunwoo said a few more things, and in the end Mad Dog still agreed. This man was too annoying, and if he refused, he would pester him all day. The moment the spar began, Mad Dog erupted with immense power. Kong Hyunwoo laughed loudly. That's it? A pair of short spears this crude? Mad Dog told him to stop talking nonsense and attack if he wanted to fight. Kong Hyunwoo gave a cold snort. Had Mad Dog forgotten that the clan head wanted his dark attribute suppressed? This filthy flame was not recognized at all. Mad Dog could not be bothered to argue. After one exchange, you'll know. Kong Hyunwoo also raised his power of flame. Then let me show you how big the gap between us is. The instant the two flames collided, Kong Hyunwoo immediately sensed that something was wrong. His ring of flame was being devoured. A moment later, Kong Hyunwoo's weapon let out a harsh buzzing tremor. In the next second, with a crack, the blade snapped cleanly in half. Kong Hyunwoo had never imagined that he would lose in a single move, and lose this badly at that. Mad Dog returned his own words to him verbatim. Looks like your weapon is pretty crude too. Once this spar ended, the promotion ceremony would soon be held, and Mad Dog would be acknowledged as an instructor and formally become the inheritor of the Flame sect. And to become sect master, 2 conditions had to be met. First, step into the 8th wheel. Second, gain the approval of most of the instructors. Leaving aside the 8th wheel for now, Lee Se-hoon felt it would be very hard for Mad Dog to gain their support. But Mad Dog said it would be fine. He could win their approval votes through sparring, though it would not be as easy as today, because it would no longer be just an internal spar. Hearing that, Lee Se-hoon became even more certain. Mad Dog could take the sect master seat, but the price would be very great. Mad Dog told Lee Se-hoon to name his price, cash or materials, as long as it was within his ability, he would give it. Besides that, he also had one more matter he wanted to entrust. Lee Se-hoon was somewhat surprised. In this life, he was going to make that request this quickly? He then looked at Mad Dog's equipment. Quite good indeed, but ultimately borrowed. Mad Dog was thinking the same thing. If Lee Se-hoon could make something of this level in only a few hours, then what kind of spear would he forge next? So Mad Dog spoke. Make me a weapon that suits me better. The bond level between Lee Se-hoon and Mad Dog rose to level 2. As intimacy increased, the relationship was formally established. Each time a transaction was established with a target, a bond stone would be generated. The more transactions there were, the faster the bond stone would mature. Meanwhile, at the auction venue on the other side, quite a few important figures had already gathered. The host feigned surprise. Next, we begin the regular auction for second-year students of the Institute of Technology. Lee Se-hoon and Eric were seated below the stage. The first lot from the second years was a garment refined from the fur of an S-rank magical beast, the white tiger, soft to the touch, yet hard as steel, and even possessed cutting properties. The host demonstrated it on the spot. The moment his weapon touched the garment, it broke directly. Just like that, items that traded durability for cutting power could often be seen through at a glance. Next to appear was Apprentice Joseph's blue shell sword. Eric turned her head and asked Lee Se-hoon, "Do you know why they're demonstrating it like this?" A lot of people only know that the white tiger's body is hard, but its traits are more complex than that. Fur, flesh, and bone are each different. The fur can imitate the sharpness of any metal that touches it, so no matter how good the weapon is, it will wear down its durability bit by bit. Eric could not help worrying. Then isn't the white light greatsword at a disadvantage? Generally, the stronger a sword's cutting power, the lower its durability. Lee Se-hoon nodded. She was right. This was clearly a trap aimed at Professor Kim In-cheol and him. If the sword snapped on the spot, it would be the professor's reputation that suffered. One by one, the earlier lots were sold, and soon it was Lee Se-hoon's work's turn. The host loudly announced, "Next, representing the freshman class of Bolsipa Academy, we will verify the quality of the white light greatsword." With a sharp swish, the sword slashed straight at the white tiger hide. The instant the blade touched the hide, the whole sword shook violently. In the end, the sword did not shatter. Instead, the force flung it from the wielder's hand. All the professors at the scene were stunned. What exactly had just happened? Why had the sword not broken, but remained completely intact instead? When they saw the effect of Lee Se-hoon's weapon clearly, the entire place froze on the spot. Someone even shouted out the sky-high price of 600 million. At that moment, Lee Se-hoon slowly stood up, because he was going up on stage to introduce this sword personally. Normally speaking, a sword forged with the concept of a killing blade should have broken when facing stone brocade weave. The white light greatsword gathers mana from the surrounding air and crystallizes it along the edge, as thin as paper, as if covering the outside of the original blade with a second edge. This density still could not be called sword aura, but its sharpness already far exceeded ordinary light. That was why it was called a killing blade. Only then did Eric understand. That strike just now had also been the effect of the killing blade. That's right, when two killing blades of the same type meet, they do not cancel each other out, but resonate. And by using that resonance, one could do something even more interesting. Lee Se-hoon used the tuning stone he had obtained from Eric to correct the disorder in its internal mana array. Once the tuning stone was activated, the originally chaotic drifting mana began to be recalibrated. As long as Lee Se-hoon added one more clear path, he could push the sword's rank even higher. With a flash of white light, this sword's rank rose to rare. System evaluation: White Light Greatsword, rank D, rare quality at D rank. A longsword infused with a pure white killing edge, thus gaining a simple skill that can amplify the killing edge, its rank raised from high grade to rare. Then Lee Se-hoon signaled to the host to add this change to the starting price. The starting price was raised directly from 1 million won to 5 million won. But even so, the atmosphere remained tense. This price was obviously an underestimate, and people would definitely fight like mad for it. Very soon, someone directly shouted 30 million won. With a wave of paddle number 3, it was raised straight to 100 million. Blondie could not stay seated either and bid 200 million. Eric followed as well, 230 million. The host's voice practically glowed with excitement. It had been a long time since he had seen so many people lose control over a single lot. Lee Se-hoon, however, was completely stunned. He only had a little over 100,000 in his account, so these figures were just pocket money to them. In the next second, one voice suppressed the entire room, a direct bid of 600 million. Everyone instinctively turned to look. Blondie's heart sank. His Yandra older sister had told him to bring the sword back at any cost, but where was he supposed to get 600 million? The whale had entered the scene. "All you little shrimp, step back." And the little shrimp he spoke of included Eric and Blondie. No matter how unwilling they were, they truly could not compete at that price. In the end, the white light greatsword was sold for 600 million won. Professor Kim burst out laughing. Even he had not expected this price. Lee Se-hoon felt like his mind had exploded. This was more money than he could spend in a lifetime. 10 minutes later, Lee Se-hoon checked his balance, and the full 500 million won had been deposited. Because of Ryu Eun-ha's status, the auction venue had not charged Lee Se-hoon any commission, equivalent to saving at least 300 million won. But Lee Se-hoon did not understand. What did Ryu Eun-ha want the sword for? It turned out Ryu Eun-ha was planning to take the sword into a dangerous zone to test it. Using something this good just for training would be too wasteful. Lee Se-hoon also wanted to see the White Light Greatsword's real combat performance with his own eyes. If you haven't decided where to go yet, how about Silver Moon Mountain? It's one of the candidate locations for the first year's live demon subjugation exercise. Ryu Eun-ha seemed somewhat troubled, so Lee Se-hoon proposed this. He could forge a weapon for Ryu Eun-ha that she truly wanted. That little bit of hesitation immediately ceased to matter. Then set a date. We're going. Lee Se-hoon laughed inwardly. As expected, this method worked best. Her hesitation just now had most likely only been an excuse. Jürgen Kruger, chairman of the UD Group, the world's #1 top joint corporation, and also the strongest summoner still alive. One of the many divine artifacts he lost when he was ambushed during the War of 10,000 Demons was hidden in the Silver Moon Mountain range. Meanwhile, Blondie also returned to his sister's side. The Yandra sister smiled. So in the end, you still didn't bring that weapon back, did you? Blondie kept apologizing, but his sister would not even look at him. Since things have come to this, think about what to do next. Very quickly, she thought of something. They would still have classes together, and she wanted Blondie to send her regards to Lee Se-hoon for her. As long as Blondie succeeded, she would bring up the matter of the inheritance ceremony to their father again. If things dragged on any longer, Blondie would soon be unable to hold on to first place. Blondie himself understood that clearly too. Faced with that temptation, he could only agree. I'll definitely bring back a sword from Lee Se-hoon. His sister nodded. Bring back a sword at any cost. His sister recalled a sentence Lee Se-hoon had said on the day of the match. For some reason, that woman makes me very uncomfortable, especially that face.